The 999 call was made at 7:44 that evening. All that Mandy Joseph could scream down the phone at that point was, "Help, help."
There were sounds of a gunshot and a woman screaming for help, and then the line went dead.
"There's been a murder." I said, "Well, what do you mean there's been a murder?" He said, "Yeah, they've found 2 women murdered up by the garage. It's got to be them."
It's something that is totally unbelievable. To kill them both, it was just devastating. And you just could never, ever imagine something like that happening in Oakcliffe.
It was vicious in the extreme.
When officers reviewed the CCTV, they identified a vehicle that came down the pathway around the time of the murder, and these are the people responsible for the deaths.
Oakcliffe, a quintessentially English village situated in the heart of Bedfordshire. Best known for being the birthplace of British explorer Arthur Henry Newman.
Oakcliffe is a smallish village in mid-Bedfordshire, straddles the A5. It's a quiet village. It's on a route between Dunstable in the south and Milton Keynes in the north.
Everyone knows everyone, really, so it's quite a nice little place to live and to stay and to be, really.
It's a lovely local community with a pub and a lovely little school. There's not a lot of trouble. It's a good little village.
I'd say the community is quite close-knit. A lot of people know a lot of other people, so everyone kind of knows everybody.
And central to the community and village life was Iris Jones and her husband.
Iris was a much-loved figure in the village, well known in the village. She'd lived here for years and years. She was known especially for the fact that she had fostered something like 120 children, she and her husband, over a sort of 30-year period, starting in the 50s and going through to the mid-1980s.
She was a woman who had fostered over 100 children. The local community held her in the highest regard.
She literally was an angel walking amongst us.
Auntie was, once you got to know her, she had a heart of gold. And she'd do anything for anybody.
She was much loved, a caring, compassionate person who opened up her home to countless children less fortunate.
I mean, it become a way of life to her, fostering several children there who we actually grew up with. And as I say, she was, that was her life, kids, really.
Iris's husband died in 1993, leaving Iris a widower. She remained close to her children, including her foster daughter, Mandy, whom she relied on.
Mandy Jones was fostered by Iris when she was about 4 years old. She's had a proper mother-daughter relationship throughout her whole life. Mandy was 34 years old. She was a carer herself. She worked in the care industry. Her whole life was about caring for others.
And when Iris's husband died, she moved back in with her foster mother to care for her in her declining health.
She was a caring girl. There was nothing she wouldn't do for you.
Iris walked with the aid of a frame and walking stick. She had heart problems, she had diabetes, and she had failing eyesight. In later years, as Iris's health declined, Mandy took a much more active role in the care of her foster mother, looking after her, caring for, making sure she had everything she needed.
Police, how can I help?
The 999 call was made at 7:44 that evening, and it was made by Mandy Joseph. All that Mandy Joseph could scream down the phone at that point was, "Help, help."
Then the line went dead. If a 999 call is cut off or goes dead for whatever reason, the operator will review what they've already heard. In this case, there was a woman screaming for help, so they would then dispatch units to the house.
Mandy's screams were not the only disturbing sound the police operator heard.
There were sounds of a gunshot, a woman screaming for help, and the control room inspector would then decide on the appropriate level of response because of the high level of risk to both the officers attending and the public. It's a proportionate response to dispatch a firearms team. In this case, it was always going to be a firearms team.
The call handlers did try to call back and there was no response, but the police were able to trace where the call had been made from, and that resulted in police being sent to the property, including armed police officers, who forcefully gained entry into the house that evening. The house where the shooting had taken place was up a gravel drive and situated behind a garage forecourt.
There's a petrol station, and by the side of it, there was a track that led down to this detached house.
Upon arrival, the armed officers were met with a gruesome sight.
They found Iris, she was lying by the sink. A further search of the house located Mandy in the lounge.
The women had been shot. Iris had been shot twice. Mandy had been shot 4 times. Shotgun cartridges were found at the house. So it was clear to the police officers that it was a shotgun killing of both women.
Immediately, police get to work preserving the scene.
Once the scene's been cordoned off, we'll be thinking about fast-track actions. What is it that we can do now to move the investigation on? The house was set back from the road, so was there any CCTV that could be reviewed straight away? What we want to do is try and identify the offenders as soon as possible.
We were sitting here watching telly, and all we could hear was sirens and a lot of commotion. And I went out and I could see the helicopter flying over Auntie's house. And I come in and I said, "There's something up," to the wife. And at the time, we had a phone, and I rang up my father and I said, "There's something going on up Auntie's house." And then my father rang me and said, "There's been a murder." And I said, "Well, what do you mean there's been a murder?" He said, "Yeah, they found 2 women murdered up by the garage." And then the bell began to sink in, and I can remember my father saying to me then, "It's got to be them." And that was a shock and a half when we knew it was both of them.
Quick assessments of the house revealed that there was no one else on the scene. However, it appeared that some items had gone missing.
A DVD was taken, the women's handbags were taken.
The motive looked like it was burglary.
Was this a burglary gone wrong?
It was just devastating, absolutely devastating. And you just could never, ever imagine something like that happening in Ockcliffe.
I think everyone talks to everybody, and it would be a very short period of time until everyone knew the situation.
I mean, this is a quiet area. People will tell you that. It was quiet then, it's quiet now. To get a double shooting, 2 people dead, in the village. Truly exceptional.
And the question on everybody's lips was, who had committed such a heinous murder?
In a little village or little villages, things spread quite quick, and people were all concerned because things like that don't happen. It's a nightmare.
This was a shocking crime for the village of Hockliffe. Somebody using that amount of force on two helpless women has only one intention, and that is to kill them.
In the quiet Bedfordshire village of Hockliffe, news has spread of the brutal murder of Iris Jones and her foster daughter, Mandy Joseph.
This is the house where Iris Jones and her late husband Clifford cared for 120 foster children. But this kindness was to prove her downfall.
The local community, and it was a quiet little area, were obviously shocked by the whole incident and very sad at the loss of two well-respected members of the community.
Everyone knew about it. It was the talk of the village. As I moved along the high street, talking to people, everyone was aware of what had happened.
Lots of people knew Iris Jones, knew Mandy, and they were just stunned that two pillars of the community, two kind, caring people, should have had their lives ended in such a way.
To me, as silly as it sounds, it's a bit like when Lady Di died, all went quiet, you know? And I think that's how it was. There was so many police around and all that lot, but it shocked everyone, really shocked the villages, not just Hockliffe.
With fear spreading through the community, police need to quickly establish the circumstances around the murders.
Once the scene's been cordoned off, the police will look for any fast-track actions, so anything that can lead them to the identity of suspects or the offenders. And that will include any passive data like CCTV, ANPR, any phone work that can be done. But it will also include speaking to witnesses, the suspects, but also what we call victimology. If you find out how a person lived, you may find out how they died.
Post-mortem results reveal that Iris was shot twice and Mandy 4 times, using a shotgun.
This is a very brutal murder. The way both Iris and Mandy have been gunned down with a shotgun, it's absolutely, it's top-scale brutal.
It was vicious in the extreme. Mandy had been shot in the chest and also in the hand, which shattered the mobile phone she was holding to make the 999 call. So that's why it abruptly ended.
Upon realising what was happening, she ran to the phone, dialed 999 and was screaming for help, but the phone was shot out of her hand, and this was confirmed by the pathologist during their post-mortem.
With the emergency call cutting out when Mandy was shot, police confirm the time of death as 7:45 p.m. so can start to piece together Iris and Mandy's last known movements.
The police have been out talking to residents in the area, doing house-to-house inquiries. And of course, they'd also made inquiries with the garage forecourt, where there was a shop, and they spoke to the staff there. Mandy had finished her shift at the care home in Luton where she worked and had arrived home. But first she called at the garage forecourt and went into the shop to buy some items, firelighters, because I think the plan was to have a log fire that evening. So she brought firelighters, she brought some cigarettes, said hello to the staff before going back up to the house.
And inquiries at the garage give police their first breakthrough.
That garage forecourt was subject to CCTV, which was handed over to the police.
The thing with this investigation is we can time the 999 call. So one of the fast-tracked actions would be to review any CCTV in the area around that time. And an obvious one was the garage forecourt, because you had to drive past that or through it to get to Iris's house. When officers reviewed the CCTV, they identified a vehicle that came down the pathway and back out onto the A6 around the time of the murder.
And one sees this people carrier moving in the distance, moving past the garage along the track.
And it was at a time which was about 10 minutes after a 999 call had been made from the house.
And that's what led the police to go to find and identify who was driving the vehicle and so on.
Once we have the registration number of the vehicle, it was flagged on the police national computer to be stopped and checked and reported back to Bedfordshire, because they may be witnesses to the offence, they also may be the offenders. So it's imperative that we find them as soon as possible, because we can put them in the area of the murder at the time it happened.
A day after the murder, and police track down the car in Suffolk. Inside is a couple. But that's not all.
When they searched the vehicle, they found a shotgun in the back. Once the police find a shotgun in the rear of the vehicle, then they were arrested on suspicion of murder straight away, because we've got 2 victims with shotgun wounds. So you've got your suspicion straight away.
The police told us on that Monday they had arrested the couple along with a 14-year-old boy.
Police named the couple arrested as 36-year-old Anita Mansfield and her husband, 46-year-old Michael Milcroft, as well as an unnamed teenager.
Where a shotgun has been used or a firearm has been used, it's vital that we identify everybody who may have been responsible or may have come into contact with the weapon. So in this case, the police forensically examined the 14-year-old boy, and that examination revealed that he had gunshot residue on him.
He's showered with gunshot debris. So he was at the scene of the crime, so that's where the police start accusing him being part of the murder.
Once suspects are arrested in a case, that's just the start of the work for the police. There's a huge amount of forensic work that has to be done. We have to carry out searches at their home address or home addresses, and we have to speak to witnesses or people that knew them and dig into their background as well to see if there's any motive that we can identify.
Police start by looking into the backgrounds of Anita Mansfield and Michael Milcroft to see how they could be linked to Mandy and Iris.
Anita Mansfield was someone Michael Milcroft met in the 1980s. He met her in a pub in Dunstable. They quickly formed a relationship.
He then married Anita Mansfield and they had a family together.
We do know that he may have worked as a pot man, helper in a local pub in Leighton Buzzard at one stage, but to all intents and purposes, he was unemployed. He was a carer for Anita. She didn't work. She had health issues to the extent that she told people she couldn't work. A lot of people, a lot of her neighbours thought this was a bit of a sham and that she was using her poor health as a meal ticket, was the way it was described.
She was claiming benefits, but always had delusions of grandeur. She craved a more affluent lifestyle.
Information found at the couple's home at the time of the arrest reveals they were on the verge of moving.
Milcroft and Mansfield had set their hearts on buying a large country house in Suffolk. Really, they wanted to put their lives on a sound financial footing. They'd lived a nomadic life of living a very much hand-to-mouth existence. They wanted to buy a big house for the family.
They'd found a house to move to, the dream home, which I think was one of the most expensive properties in the area. They wanted to go to that home with its swimming pool and so on.
And so the house near Beccles, that became the house of their dreams. And it was on the market, I think, for £740,000. The purchase should have gone through in the December of 2004. But again, Millcroft and Mansfield weren't ready. They hadn't got the funds. And so a new date was arrived at, which was February 28.
Millcroft and Mansfield were pulling the wool over the sellers' eyes in relation to the funding for buying their house.
With the couple living on state benefits and with no savings, police are perplexed as to how they can afford such an expensive new home. But it's not long before officers discover something of interest.
They were renting a property, and searches of that property found documents belonging to Mandy Joseph in the house itself.
The documents are revealed to be life insurance policies taken out by Mandy Joseph 18 months earlier.
She took out two with different companies. One was Norwich Union and one was Zurich Insurance.
Further investigations reveal that in the event of Mandy's death, her beneficiary named in the policies would receive a staggering £800,000. And this beneficiary was named as Anita Oakfield Bennett, also known as Anita Mansfield. Suddenly, police believe they have a motive for murder.
For the insurance companies to pay out, Mandy Joseph had to die.
Police investigating the murders of Mandy Joseph and Iris Jones have arrested a couple, Anita Mansfield and Michael Millcroft, alongside a 14-year-old boy. A search of the couple's home uncovers life insurance documents in the name of Mandy Joseph, which would pay out £800,000 to Anita Mansfield if she died.
Their plan was to get their hands on around £800,000. And unknown to Mandy, Anita Mansfield had taken out life insurance on her life, so that in the event of Mandy's death, the money from two life insurance policies would come to Mansfield and Millcroft.
You can't just go out and take an insurance policy on somebody. There has to be a lot of deception involved, and in this case, they deceived both Mandy and the insurance company.
The couple were extremely cunning all the way through. They built up a picture of Mandy's medical history. They had documents belonging to Mandy they shouldn't have had. They had a mobile phone of Mandy's that was taken from the house. Again, these were all things that could provide them with details of Mandy that would help them in the plan to set up these bogus insurance policies.
Police now believe Anita and Michael fraudulently set up the insurance policies to help fund a new lifestyle.
The plan was to buy this large mansion with the proceeds of that insurance policy.
There were policies apparently taken out on the life of Mandy, and they would have provided the husband and wife defendants with a beautiful home with a swimming pool and all sorts of other good qualities.
To get the money, Mandy Joseph had to die, and that meant they had to kill her.
But the question still remains. How are Anita and Michael connected to their victims, Mandy and Iris?
Michael Millcroft was the foster son of Iris Jones. He had gone to live with Iris and her family in 1959 when he was just 10 days old. And Iris gave a stable home full of love and warmth to lots and lots of children, and Michael Millcroft was one of them. So at the age of 10 days old, he was living with Iris and brought up by Iris and her late husband and became part of the family.
So for his whole life, Iris was his mother.
I remember Michael, he'd be a bit younger than me. He used to play with us as kids. He was part of our family.
It was said that Michael regarded Mandy as his younger sister. She looked on him as an older brother. They were brought up together as children. They sat round the dinner table, went on holidays together.
At one stage, Michael's girlfriend, Anita, even moved into the home with him. But in 1989, it seems there was a divide in the family.
Iris and Mandy, Michael and Anita had all gone on holiday to Mallorca. There was a big row while on holiday, with the result that when everyone returned, Michael and Anita Mansfield moved out. And that really marked a 12-year gap in things, because he stayed away from Iris and Mandy for all that time and didn't come back into their lives until around 2000. When Michael came back, he changed his name. He was always known as Michael Jones. He'd taken Iris's name. But he was now calling himself Michael Millcroft. And he was married to Anita. They'd started a family. And he was unemployed.
It's believed that this is the point in which the couple devised their devious plan.
For that to happen by a foster brother is just... You wouldn't put that, would you? It's something that is totally unbelievable, to think that money corrupts everything. To kill them both, nightmare.
You know, we kept thinking to ourselves, no, it can't be Michael what's done it.
With news sinking in that Iris's own foster son could be behind her murder, forensic evidence comes in.
We have the forensic evidence, DNA on the triggers of the shotgun, victim's blood on the shotgun, as well as Mansfield's DNA. These are the people responsible for the deaths.
Police present all their evidence against Anita Mansfield, Michael Millcroft and the teenager to the Crown Prosecution Service.
And they decided to charge them with murder.
There were murder counts and also counts of attempting to obtain money by deception.
With the three pleading not guilty to murder, preparation begins to build a case for trial. Starting with trying to prove that the couple had taken out the fraudulent insurance policy.
Anita did much of the setting up over the phone. She would ring an insurance company, pretended to be Mandy Joseph, and proceeded to give Mandy's medical history, saying what she smoked in a week, what alcohol intake, a general medical history, that sort of thing. These were all details that she had somehow gleaned over the last few years in the build-up to the killings, and it helped her in the pretense that she was Mandy Joseph on the phone.
With the policy set up, there was only one thing left to do.
Mandy's death was essential for the claim to be made on insurance. It was erasing certainty that Iris would be in the cottage, because at that time she was housebound. So they both had to be killed if they were going to succeed in getting the insurance money.
It's hard to believe that anybody thought they could get away with it. I mean, to us, you've got to be a little bit sick in the head to think that you can get away with something like that to start off with.
With the trial looming, defence barristers are appointed for the 3 defendants.
I've done many murder trials, either prosecuting or defending. The first I knew about this case was I was instructed in the autumn of 2005, and because the police and the CPS had chosen to charge the boy with being a murderer, he went into custody. So he's remanded in custody, and he goes to a small specialist unit where I visited him.
But there was one piece of information which hadn't yet been revealed about the 14-year-old boy.
He was their son. And I think potentially the most evil part of the case was that the parents thought they could blame their son and get away with it.
In Bedfordshire, Michael Millcroft, Anita Mansfield and their own son have pleaded not guilty to the murder of Iris Jones and her foster daughter, Mandy Joseph. The trial begins at Luton Crown Court.
The defendants in the case were a mother who complained of ill health, a father who was a rather pathetic sort of individual, and their 14-year-old son who left the premises covered in gunpowder.
What was revealed in court was the lengths that they went to plan this murder.
The court hears exactly what unfolded on that fateful day.
It was just an ordinary day. It was a Sunday afternoon. It was known that Millcroft and Mansfield were coming to the house that evening, and that's one of the reasons that she called into the shop, because the plan was to have a log fire burning for them when they arrived to make it homely and welcoming. And so Mandy had called into the shop to buy firelighters and to help get the fire going. Iris, he was waiting for him in the kitchen, having made a cup of tea and got a log fire roaring.
The first shot would have been delivered to the foster mother. She goes down on the ground in the kitchen. Mandy came into the kitchen, having heard the shot, and received the second barrel. She staggered out of the kitchen, and the son was able to describe to me that his father, having fumbled with the shotgun, reloaded it, went out into the hallway and shot Mandy a second time.
At one point, Mandy Joseph had been on her knees, having received a shotgun blast, but she was still on her knees when she was shot again.
Mandy still wasn't dead, so he fired bullets, shotgun into her again a couple of times, and then returned to the kitchen where his foster mother was still breathing. So she heard the killing, and he fired at her, finally killing her, and then left the premises.
In those last seconds of their lives, for Mandy and Iris, it must have been truly terrifying.
In the execution of their crime, the couple went to great lengths to make sure their plan didn't fail.
They even planned to alter the shot in the shotgun cartridge. Normally, a shotgun cartridge will fire small ball bearings and they will spread out into a certain pattern. In this case, they used harder and larger ball bearings. absolutely lethal and illegal to change the shot as well.
The jury also hears how the couple went even further to try to distance themselves from the crime by blaming their son.
Here were two defendants saying that it was the third defendant that did it. They were totally innocent. If there was any dishonesty shown by them when they were first seen by the police, it was because they wanted to protect the boy. That was their story. His story, of course, was that he simply wasn't involved. I think potentially the most evil part of the case was that the parents thought they could blame their son and get away with it. I relied upon the 14-year-old boy, he was then 15 when I represented him, relied on his recollection. He was the only witness to the killing, and his recollection was clear, and it seemed to fit in with other evidence.
The young boy was able to tell the police that he was aware that Millcroft and Mansfield had been planning the deaths of the women for some time, and that various ways of killing them had been discussed and thought about.
They sent the 14-year-old son to the library to research on poisoning.
He did what he was told. He went and looked in the library and read about one or two things and reported back on it.
Researching not just an insurance scam followed by a shooting, but other methods that how Mandy should be killed, including looking into poisoning her, looking into electrocuting her, looking into masonry, heavy masonry falling onto her, or that she would be the victim of a mugging gone wrong.
But it was clear from the evidence that was presented that they've manipulated him as he was growing up.
Anita's defense mirrored that of her husband. Both claimed they heard the firearm discharged, and the father left the vehicle and went in and found this dreadful scene. She claimed to have remained in the vehicle outside the cottage. Her husband went in and then left a few minutes later together with the boy.
The thing I remember most about this investigation was the sheer callousness and brutality of the murder, the callousness to take out life insurance policies because they wanted a house, and the brutality to murder two innocent women so that you can buy that house. It's evil.
After weeks of hearing evidence, the jury retires to consider their verdict.
The 14-year-old boy was found not guilty in this case.
He wasn't wicked, and he wasn't a killer. And that's what the jury must have been satisfied by at the end of their deliberations, that he had not been proved to be any part of the murder.
Then the jury delivers its verdict against Anita Mansfield and Michael Millcroft.
The evidence in this case was overwhelming. We have the forensic evidence. There's Millcroft's fingerprints on the trigger of the shotgun, as well as Mansfield's DNA. The 14-year-old boy had shotgun residue on his person. We've also got the CCTV from the time of the murder, and we've also got the shotgun found in the back of Millcroft's car. Adding to that, the documentation belonging to Mandy Joseph found at the rented property in Suffolk, as well as all the financial documents which identified fraudulent life insurance policies. So, yeah, pretty damning.
And it appears the jury agreed. Both were found guilty of murder.
Anita Mansfield received a sentence of 30 years, and Michael Millcroft received a sentence of 25 years. Mansfield got the longer sentence because the judge found that she had been the prime mover in what happened, in putting together the plan She had been the cold, calculated director of operations. Millcroft had very much been a passenger in what happened.
And the reality was that this was a vicious, mean, wicked killing. And I seem to remember an observation by the judge that they had shown no remorse at any time, and that was clearly the case.
The judge said this was, it was no sudden spur-of-the-moment killing.
They never once apologised for what had happened. They showed no remorse.
And the case has left its mark.
When you leave the court afterwards, you never forget the tragedy of the death of the two women.
I think the saddest thing about this crime is how little Millcroft and Mansfield valued the lives of their family.
Why they done it, I know why they done it. They done it for money, but why anyone would think they could get away with it, it's quite unbelievable, really.
I've been a policeman now for nearly 29 years, and I've dealt with some very nasty people, but I've never come across any people quite so evil.
Following the sentencing of Millcroft and Mansfield, Iris's natural son, Brian, revealed how his mum would have been looking forward to her foster son's visit on that fateful day.
First thing she'd do would be at the kitchen sink to make a cup of tea. And that's how she would have greeted them. Hello, love, do you want a cup of tea? And then they shot her.
I mean, Mandy would still be here now, and even today, there's not many days something triggers your mind and you think of Mandy and my Auntie Iris. That's all I can really say.
The death of Iris and Mandy, these were women that had given their lives to helping and caring for other people. Iris especially, she had taken Michael into her arms when he was just 10 days old. Truly, truly shocking and really, really upsetting.
Experience the power of science to crack a crime. Forensics: Catching the Killer is new Friday at 9 on Sky Mix.
Good morning, Surrey Police Contact Centre. How can I help you?
A strange thing happened to me this morning. I went for a walk and got attacked.
So I remember the night very clearly of when it happened. There's forensics down the road. Like, something serious has happened now, like what?
No issues with anything, with anybody or anything that could be related, no?
No, last year I had an issue with my partner, but that all sorted and we're friends again.
A very significant head injury that had been suffered. It had been caused by someone, and this became a murder investigation.
This murder was one of the most brutal that I have seen within 20 years.
You never think it's going to happen on your own doorstep. There's some evil people about.
It was almost Shakespearean in terms of the motivation, the jealousy, and what that can do.
On the eastern side of the River Blackwater in Surrey lies the small village of Ash.
It sort of sits in between Aldershot in Hampshire and Guildford. Ash is fairly typical of a lot of places in Surrey in that you will find lots of different communities within a community. From a policing perspective, not a lot happens.
They're a very close-knit community around here. Everyone knows everyone.
At the heart of the community lives 59-year-old Joy Bolton.
She was really a lovable and special person. She did have a big circle of friends because she used to work in Potter's music shop, and then she left there due to illness.
She'd always say hello or wave at the window if she was in the house. She was very much always quite happy and never seemed to say a bad word about anyone.
Auntie Joy was a little naughty auntie, if I can say. She's a little naughty auntie in the way of the... she was one of those that turned up unannounced, which was quite funny. And she'd turn up, I'm not staying long, and her not staying long would always turn into at least a couple of hours.
In 2021, Joy started dating local man Trevor Dibner. They had known each other for 18 years.
Trevor Dibner is somebody, again, who has spent his life working. Trevor had a number of businesses and was known locally as a taxi driver. He's also a mechanic and latterly had started working for Ford, where he was doing MOTs. He was somebody who had an interest in motorsport, and he collected model buses, which you know was a passion of his.
I knew him in my teenage years when he would be driving the minibuses, and we would hire minibuses from him to do runs to girls' nights out, if I was out with the girls, or if we were going to the Ascot races with our partners, he'd take us there.
They used to go and see Stock Car, go and watch Stock Car. They also used to go to these old bus fairs and everything. And I think it was just a little bit of an attraction.
In October 2022, the couple moved in together and their relationship flourished.
Trevor and Joy became engaged at Sandown Racecourse on the 4th of December, and Trevor announced it, as we do these days, on Facebook to tell friends, contacts that he and Joy had become engaged. Joy was at a time in her life where things were starting to go right. She had things to look forward to, and things were going well for her.
But life for the happy couple is about to change.
I received a call very late on the 11th of May from the on-call crime scene manager who was in attendance at Churchview in Ash. He'd responded to reports of a suspicious death.
On the 11th of May, Trevor had gone to work and spent the day at work. He'd been unable to get hold of Joy throughout the day. And then he came back to his home address and found Joy was lying on the floor, not moving. He called the ambulance service to report this. At first, it wasn't clear to the officers who were there whether or not this was a case where somebody else had been involved. There was the potential Joy was quite vulnerable and unstable on her feet. She could have fallen.
Within the small community, news begins to spread of a police presence at Joy's house.
I heard from my eldest grandson. I said, what's the matter? Come on. He said, it's Joy. I said, oh no, she's not in hospital again, is she? Just like that. And he said, no, it's worse than that, Nan. I said, what do you mean it's worse than that?
So I remember the night very clearly of when it happened. There's forensics down the road. They're pulling the sofas outside the house. There's a carpet outside the house. Like, they're bringing everything out. They're all in hazmat suits, everything. And I was like, shit, like, something serious has happened now. Like, what?
Phone rang, and it was my sister-in-law. And she said, have you heard? I went, oh, what's happened? She said, about your auntie. I went, auntie who? Your Auntie Joy. I went, what do you mean? And she said, she's been beaten up. And I put the phone down, and my hands were so clammy. I looked at my partner, I was sat beside him, and I went, you need to take me to my Auntie Joyce, please, now.
And it was raining, it was cold. Got up there, police cars were there. It was cornered off from round the corner, tape, and the police were standing outside. We parked up, and I went across to the policeman, and I said, and he said, who are you? I said, I'm Joy's eldest sister. I said, can you please tell me what's happened to her? He said, I can't at the moment. I said, please tell me, is she alive or is she dead? I said, tell me. I've got to know. So he said, well, I'm ever so sorry. I said, don't say anymore.
It was quite quickly then all over social media. Something's happened in Church View, the police are all there. Doesn't really happen, especially in a quiet community like this.
The policeman stood there, guarding the door, another policeman inside. Everybody gathered around, lined my auntie's pathway. And I said to the officer, excuse me, can you tell me, please, what's going on? And as he was talking, as the officer was talking to us, I happened to look down a bit to my auntie's doormat. I saw my auntie's foot, just a big pool of blood, about a dinner plate size. But her foot was buckled back, like as if she'd been crawling, trying to get into the front room, fighting for her life.
Surrey detectives are at the scene of a suspected assault, which has left local woman Joy Bolton dead. Her fiancé, Trevor Dibner, has called emergency services after returning home from work to find her motionless on the floor.
The injuries that Joy sustained were amongst the worst head injuries that I've ever observed. It was very clear that there was no other mechanism than a repeated assault that could have caused them. That repeated assault had been committed by somebody.
As the police begin their investigation, Joy's family remain outside her home, waiting for information. Joy's fiancé is still on the scene. He's the only one who can tell them anything.
I was sitting in the back of my eldest grandson's car, and Joy's partner come over. I said, tell me what's happened. And he said, well, I come home about 20 to 6 tonight and had to push my way through the front door. And there she was laying there. He said, but I tried ringing her between 10 and 10:30 like I normally do. And he couldn't get an answer. I said, well, why didn't you go home and check on her?
While detectives launch a murder inquiry, their colleagues are looking into reports of another attack on a female, just a few streets from Joy's house.
Yeah, I went for a walk this morning, and this woman come up to me, asked me if I was Sarah. I said yes. The next thing, she's pulling my hair out, grabbed my carrier bag, which had my raincoat in it, and grabbed my glasses off me. I don't know if she threw them away because I couldn't find them.
Okay.
And ran off.
Okay, so she literally just said, are you Sarah?
The woman is alleged to have pulled her hair and scratched her, as well as taking a carrier bag that she had with her, which she said had her coat and glasses in.
She said, no, she grabbed my hair and said that'll come in handy, because she took a chunk of hair.
You don't know the lady at all?
Not a clue, not a clue.
But she knew your name?
Yeah, she said stay away as well.
She stated that she had been approached by a woman who was unknown to her, described her as late 40s, early 50s, dark glasses, long black coat, hood up, carrying a plastic bag.
It just seems strange that she said that will come in handy, my chunk of hair.
Yeah.
That's what my daughter said. She said, I don't like that.
No.
Mum, what's she going to use your hair for?
The woman had walked away from her assault, suffering only minor injuries. Officers take the details of the woman and are surprised to discover she is Sarah Mackenzie, Trevor Dibner's ex.
Sarah Mackenzie also lived in Ash. She'd previously been in a relationship with Trevor, and they'd lived together for a number of years until Trevor made the decision that he would leave Sarah to be with Joy.
Police now need to look into the fact Trevor's fiancée and his former partner have been attacked on the same day.
It's unusual and it's a coincidence given what had happened to Joy. So forensic strategies and search strategies were put in place to investigate the robbery of Sarah Mackenzie just as much as the homicide of Joy Bolton.
Sarah phoned Trevor straight away and told him that she was attacked. Sarah described the person as 40-odd-year-old, jogging towards her, ripped her glasses off her face.
Trevor agreed to go round to Sarah's house on his way home, which was something that he would often do and had continued to do even after leaving Sarah for Joy. Trevor said that he spent a few minutes there, made sure that Sarah was okay before going back to his home.
Detectives are suspicious of Trevor's behaviour. He's told them he had spent all day at work worrying about Joy because he couldn't get hold of her. Now they discover he hadn't gone straight home.
There were a couple of things about what had gone on that weren't or didn't seem quite right. First, he had a concern for Joy, who he's very clear about it was the love of his life, and he didn't go home and see that she was okay. And second, that on his way home, in spite of being worried about Joy and worried that she may have fallen, he did go and check that Sarah was okay in relation to the robbery.
Despite their relationship being over, Trevor maintained a friendship with his former partner.
She used to text. Before he even left for work, he used to read her messages, then text her back to say that he'd be going round there.
Trevor and Sarah were together for 13 years in what seems to be a tumultuous relationship by all accounts, even from Sarah herself.
She was a jealous woman, and she did go round to Joy's place and said to him, what she got, what I haven't got. And apparently he said, you haven't got a patch on, Joy.
After hearing about Joy's death from Trevor himself, Sarah immediately makes her way to their home.
She'd come to the scene, apparently to offer some support to Trevor. Her actions at the scene went beyond what you would expect a normal bystander to do, so she tried to get into the address to see what had happened and had to be stopped by one of our colleagues from the ambulance service stopping her getting in.
Here's his ex-partner. She's just come to give him support, but also something happened to her today that may be related. So saying about that'd be great for DNA.
So I've got a reference number. Yeah, she pulled my hair, and as you can see, I got scratched. And she said, "Yeah, I can use that later." So with this happening, makes me wonder if she wanted DNA, hair, and scratch, and now somebody doesn't like him, obviously.
Yeah. Hi, chap. You okay? Yeah. I'm very sorry. Very sorry. What's happened today?
She started to tell people that she'd been the victim of a robbery, and that it had happened about 200 yards or so away from the address that we were at. And she made the connection that it was likely to be about Trevor, and she used the phrase along the lines of, "Isn't it strange that Trevor's two ladies have been attacked on the same day?"
The potentially linked attacks raise suspicions at the scene, and police make a decision.
Trevor was initially arrested and nominated as a suspect in relation to the murder of Joy.
But that wasn't all.
It started to be suspected that Sarah Mackenzie knew something about what had happened, and a decision was made that she would be arrested for murder.
Detectives in Surrey have two suspects in custody for the murder of 59-year-old Joy Bolton.
We knew that somebody was arrested. First of all, I said a woman. I said straight away, Sarah. And then they said about the man. I said Trevor. I felt really sick.
The hypotheses that I considered in this case were, first, that Joy Bolton had been killed by Sarah Mackenzie. Second, that Joy Bolton had been killed by Sarah Mackenzie, assisted by Trevor Dibner. Third, that Joy Bolton had been killed by the robber who had attacked Sarah Mackenzie earlier that day.
As you can see, I got scratched, and she said, "Yeah, I can use that later."
The reason that Sarah was suspected was the result of her, frankly, bizarre behaviour at the scene, as well as a robbery that she'd reported earlier in the day, which put her within the vicinity of the murder at the right time of the murder. Trevor was suspected as Trevor had been to Sarah Mackenzie's address before going back to find Joy, which was thought to be unusual and led to him being suspected of Joy's murder.
With the former couple now in custody, investigators need evidence and turn to the residence of Ash. The smallest observation will be vital in proving their case.
A neighbour of Joy's had seen a figure who he initially described as being male, but later wasn't sure if it was a male or a female, who was dressed in dark clothing with a mask and carrying a white carrier bag, approaching Joy's door and hammering on the door for some time until the door was opened. Another neighbour had heard a disturbance. There was another neighbour upstairs who again saw a figure approaching the door, so there was a lot of consistent evidence.
The neighbours help police establish a timeline around Joy's murder, but the details are sketchy, leaving detectives with a number of possible scenarios to examine.
I think it's difficult when you're in that situation, living in such a quiet village. Also, there's the element of not wanting to cause a fuss, seeing someone walking in dark clothing in the street and being at the door. As much as an argument did happen and neighbours heard what was going on, you don't expect murder.
While officers on the ground try to piece together events leading up to the murder, detectives are interviewing 64-year-old Trevor Dibner and 61-year-old Sarah Mackenzie.
After Trevor had been arrested, he was interviewed and gave a full account of what had happened. He said that on the day this happened, they'd followed their normal routine, that he'd got out of bed and Joy had made his sandwiches, kissed him goodbye, and he'd gone off to work where he was doing MOT tests. He said during the course of the day he would normally phone Joy. He did so, but was unable to get hold of her, and he became quite worried that something may have happened to her. Perhaps she'd fallen, or that there was some problem at home. He decided, because he didn't know that he couldn't leave work, and that he would effectively deal with it later.
Why did Trevor go to Sarah's before going back to check his beloved, who he wanted to marry? Why did he go there first and not to Auntie Joy's? Why?
Sarah Mackenzie was arrested. Her initial reaction was one of surprise, as though she didn't understand why this had happened to her. And she maintained that initially. Her initial response to the questions asked by my colleagues who interviewed her was no comment, but in a way that she didn't know what this was about and had no understanding of it. She did become unwell while she was in custody and was taken to hospital.
Meanwhile, Joy's fiancé, Trevor, has been held under suspicion of murder for 36 hours. Detectives are running out of time to charge him.
My name's Trevor and I was Joy's fiancé. Trying to prove your innocence is very hard. Very hard. But yeah, she was just so nice, so genuine. Yeah, she's Joy by name and Joy by nature. The 7 months that Joy and I had together was just out of this world. Out of this world.
The day of his fiancée's death is etched in Trevor's memory.
I left her in the morning and she was fine, and I came home to find her in the evening. You know, it was just gut-wrenching, really. I just knew straight away looking at her, I knew she was dead. I touched her, she was freezing cold, but I don't want to tell you what else I saw because it was gory, you know, and that wasn't by just falling over. But I had to hold it together because I obviously getting arrested, etc. That was another daunting thing for me. I've been, you know, all of a sudden they've stood there and said, Trevor, we're going to arrest you on suspicion of murder. And I'm thinking, but I haven't done anything.
Police released Trevor after questioning, but he still has to be ruled out of any involvement.
Blood staining was found on his clothing. It was all looked at in terms of blood pattern analysis and compared to the account that he'd given, that he'd entered the address, found Joy and knelt down next to her, and it was all consistent with his account. There was nothing on his clothing that would have been consistent with him having been present at the time of the offence.
We were able to take Trevor's account, and there were a number of things that he told us that we were able to check. The movements of his car on ANPR were consistent with his account. His workplace confirmed that he'd spent the day at work to the extent that there was CCTV there which showed he was at work all day. It was very clear that Trevor Dibnah was not responsible.
Investigators turned their full attention on 61-year-old grandmother, Sarah Mackenzie. Few people know her better than Trevor.
Sarah's, she's stubborn, and also Sarah's got a, let's say, a controlling streak in her. She likes to be in charge, you know, but that's what she is. That's what she is.
Despite the couple separating, Trevor and Sarah would regularly keep in touch. When she texts to tell him she's been robbed, he's concerned.
Sarah's shown me where she'd had her hair pulled because she's got short hair anyway, and she spoke about it again. And I said, well, OK, but look, I've got to go. Maybe, yeah, perhaps I should have come home earlier in the day, but I don't, what do I say? What do I say to somebody about I need to go home and find, you know, because I can't get hold of somebody? The way I see it, I just had to wait till I got home from work. While I was on my way home, she was texting me to see if, was everything OK, is there something wrong? But I didn't answer her back because obviously I had to deal with calling the ambulance and the police because I'd found Joy on the floor. And I quite obviously knew she was dead. Then I texted her back and said, no, it's not. No, it's not okay. And as I say, when the ambulance turned up, she turned up in her car behind it and come over and stood there and held my arm as if she was coming to comfort me.
On body cam footage, police body cam, him and Sarah holding arms, linked arms, stood near a lamppost outside my Auntie Joy's property.
As Trevor tries to come to terms with Joy's murder and being a suspect, Sarah Mackenzie is released from hospital and taken back to the police station for further questioning. She claims she has no recollection of the day of Joy's murder, but evidence from the local neighbourhood puts her clearly in the frame.
We conducted a number of CCTV inquiries and found a camera on Churchview Road. This captured an image of somebody walking down Churchview Road wearing black clothing. The officer who viewed the CCTV recognised that figure as being Sarah Mackenzie.
And what happened was that in the morning of the day, Sarah Mackenzie went to work as usual, was dropped off at 9:30 in the morning by her work colleague, and proceeded very quickly to change into a full disguise, black clothing, mask, gloves, etc., arm herself with a heavy implement, and walk to Joy Bolton's address.
Along this stretch of pavement, Sarah was walking along towards Joy's house before the murder was committed, dressed in all black, very eerie costume, walking with a lot of purpose towards Joy's house. Almost 15 minutes later, she heads back the same direction, same pavement, same path, after committing the murder, dressed in the same outfit, all black, head to toe, again with purpose as she walked away from the scene of the crime. She was caught on the CCTV around here.
Evidence from the forensic team at the flat helps piece together what happened inside.
The property Churchview Ash was a ground floor maisonette. Front door opened into a small hallway with a bathroom in front of you. The female was found lay face down with her feet in the threshold of the hallway to the living room and her head pointing into the living room. The head injuries were horrific. The victim had an injury to her forehead, which potentially was the first injury to bleed, and that may have caused the blood within the hallway. The majority of her injury was to the back of her head, and that was likely to have been caused when she was face down in the living room. The post-mortem concluded that the victim would have been rapidly incapacitated, so it's likely that she would have been on the floor when the majority of the blows were inflicted.
Detectives are left in little doubt that Sarah was responsible for the attack on Joy Bolton, and her house is searched.
Given that during her account of the robbery, she stated that she'd returned home and taken a bath, I asked that a scientist attend that address with a CSI to conduct a luminol search. Luminol can detect blood that has been diluted up to 10,000 times. It's an incredible search tool for us where offenders have tried to clean up after they've committed an offence. These images are taken within the bathroom at Sarah Mackenzie's address. This picture shows what can be seen with the naked eye. As you can see, there is no visible blood staining at all. And this image shows those areas with the luminol visible. So that is what a reaction, a positive reaction with luminol looks like. The areas that are marked here are the areas that were swabbed and showed that Joy Bolton's DNA was represented within them. That evidence for us was key. Within that blood, which was swabbed by a CSI, was Sarah Mackenzie's DNA, as you would expect, as it's her bathroom. but also there were very small amounts of Joy Bolton's DNA as well. And although we couldn't categorically say that it was blood, luminol would indicate that it was.
I was confident that we had a good and strong circumstantial case with which to charge Sarah Mackenzie, but we were missing something.
Fingernail swabs and cuttings were taken from Joy, and while Sarah was still in custody, I made a fast-track submission of those swabs and cuttings to the lab. Very quickly, that came back with Sarah's DNA under Joy's fingernails on her right hand, which corresponded to the scratches on the left side of Sarah Mackenzie's face.
In Surrey, analysis of DNA found under murder victim Joy Bolton's fingernails has come back as Sarah Mackenzie's.
Whilst Joy was vulnerable, she did put up a fight, and one of her last actions was to prove crucial in proving this case.
The DNA analysis reveals the sample to be a 1 in a billion match, proving that Mackenzie was at the scene when Joy died.
If, you know, Joy had to stand up to anybody, she would. She did give her last fought, you know. She was very weak, could barely stand up unaided, as I say, but she fought back and slapped, scratched, whatever she did to Sarah's head, and thank goodness she did.
But Sarah says she can explain her DNA being on Joy. She reminds investigators that she too is the victim of an assault.
Sarah implied that the offender had stolen her DNA and planted it under Joy's fingernails after inflicting catastrophic injury. They would have had to have the presence of mind to have thought to have planted the DNA under the fingernail of Joy's right hand, which was in keeping with the scratches on the left side of Sarah Mackenzie's face.
The robbery is that it was intended to give Sarah Mackenzie a reason to be in the area that the murder had happened in case she'd been picked up on CCTV or seen by somebody, because she knew that Joy had scratched her, she knew that the police had her DNA, and she knew that we would find her through that to account for her DNA being on Joy's fingernails.
But Sarah sticks to her story, insisting that she was robbed on the same morning as Joy was attacked. A public appeal is made for information, but investigators find no evidence of a robbery having occurred.
With all of the circumstantial evidence and now a very good forensic hit, we were satisfied that there was more than enough evidence with which to charge Sarah Mackenzie with Joy's murder.
On the 17th of May 2023, Sarah Mackenzie is formally charged with the murder of Joy Bolton and perverting the course of justice. Police and prosecutors need to prepare for trial and identify a motive. Why would Sarah want Joy dead? A delve into the months leading up to the murder throws up some clues after Trevor left Sarah for Joy.
A fire was reported to the fire service initially of a shed in Sarah Mackenzie's front garden. At the time, it was treated as being of a suspicious origin. It was noted later that most of the property that was destroyed belonged to Trevor. Sarah Mackenzie was likely to have set the fire herself.
To me, it doesn't take much to work out what the problem was, why it happened. It purely happened because I put on Facebook the previous day that we'd got engaged. I mean, it's pretty obvious from that.
The fire was not the only disturbance that Sarah was accused of creating.
When he left her, she had damaged his property, thrown it out of the window, cut up his leather jacket, burnt photographs of his family.
And then a couple of weeks later, she then gets, my auntie gets a message on her phone, a shouting down message, you're this, you're that, you know, really nastily.
People say to me it's jealousy, and I do understand that people do get jealous, but do you still have to go to that length? Is there a necessity to go to that length?
Within 6 months of the brutal murder of Joy Bolton, 61-year-old Sarah Mackenzie stands trial. She pleads not guilty.
On Thursday, the 11th of May 2023, between 10 o'clock and 10:20 a.m, Joy Bolton opened her front door to someone. Shortly after opening the door, that person proceeded to bludgeon her to death with a heavy implement. These are the first words that the jury heard about the case that they were about to try. They knew it was a murder. They knew nothing else.
5 weeks it went on for. Long 5 weeks, cold, wet, windy, horrible, reliving every moment.
It was just awful. It was awful every time going into that courtroom to think what you're going to hear next.
Sarah Mackenzie presented herself, as we anticipated she would, as somebody who herself was vulnerable and playing on her age.
I sat where I couldn't see her because I couldn't bear to face her for what she had done to my dear sister Joy.
But I think the worst thing is just knowing that Sarah didn't do it 20 plus times only. She kicked her as well. Like some, I don't know, like a dead thing at the side of the road, maybe. To hear that my auntie's flat was a blood-splattered place. A murder scene.
Sarah Mackenzie instructed her lawyers to go down the route of trying to blame someone, but it was plain from the police evidence, and indeed the evidence we called via the police officers, that there was no foundation to suggest that anybody else was a possible candidate for this crime.
After weeks of harrowing testimony, the jury retires to consider its verdict.
It didn't take the jury long to convict Sarah Mackenzie. That came as no surprise in reality, given the strength of the evidence.
Sarah Mackenzie is found guilty of murder and perverting the course of justice. She's sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 26 years.
She just stood there and grinned. As much to say, oh well.
I'm sorry, at the end of the day, 26 years is still not going to bring Joy back. You know, I know it's supposed to be a life term, and in theory, she'll die in jail. But at the end of the day, that doesn't bring Joy back. She was just the love of my life.
It was almost Shakespearean in terms of the motivation, the jealousy, and what that can do. Most people resist it. Unfortunately, for Joy Bolton, not Sarah Mackenzie.
In this particular case, which was a brutal, unprovoked and sustained attack on a vulnerable woman who had done nothing more than start a relationship with somebody, I felt enormous pride at the work that with the team that I work with. We were able to bring Sarah Mackenzie to justice, and that she is now in a place that she can cause no more harm to anybody else.
This case was exceptional. It's not often, if ever, that you have grandmothers appearing in a dock murdering their love rival. Someone who was completely normal, who was, as per the jury's verdict, enraged by jealousy and spite. It will remain in our memories for as long as we live, I'm sure.
A year on, and Joy's family are trying to come to terms with life without her.
My favourite memory of Joy is she'd always be there if you wanted somebody to talk to, and vice versa with me. She didn't deserve what she got. Didn't deserve it at all.
I go and see Auntie Joy at the grave, and I take my dog with me, because she loved my dog. And I sit and chat. It's not the same. She don't laugh anymore. I find it hard. I'll be driving through Ash, which isn't very often, because I can't bear it. Not round my Auntie Joy's, I don't go round that way. Not ever since. But I look at the shops, see an old lady with a trolley, and I always look back. Is that Auntie Joy? This is not Auntie Joy. So you don't just murder one person. You hurt everybody.
Please be aware that this programme also contains themes of domestic violence.
It's unusual that a murder offence is captured on CCTV. Very harrowing.
Police boys, there's actually a dead body in the ditch.
Couldn't even recognise her. Black eyes. Everything was just basically swollen and bruised.
He's an animal. Really, he's destroyed my family.
They started like kicking me and punching me, and I was terrified.
We had to take a dangerous offender off the street.
He's just evil. He's took a mother away from her 5 children. That's the monster.
Ten miles south of Birmingham lies the pretty Worcestershire village of Hopwood.
Hopwood is what I would describe as a rural area, lots of country lanes.
Very peaceful and tranquil. That's the kind of thing you'd expect from this kind of place.
You've got the canal down there. You've got a couple of nice pubs. It's just lovely.
It's a very sleepy village. There's obviously not much traffic coming around here. But everyone knows everybody in the village.
They look out for each other. They can go to each other to ask for help. It's a really tight-knit community.
But the peace of this rural idyll is about to be shattered.
Emergency, which service?
Police boys.
Police emergency.
Hello, yeah. Sorry, I'm just walking my dog up the lane at the moment. There's actually a dead body in the ditch.
Just before 6 a.m. on that morning, dog walker walking his dog in Wast Hills Lane, and the dog came across a pile of leaves. And the dog walker then discovered there was blood underneath the leaves.
I just saw a pile of blood on the road, and I thought, where's all that come from? And the dog's gone to a ditch, and I thought, oh, somebody's dumped rubbish. And then I could see an hand and a leg. I thought, oh, sorry.
It is the body of a woman in her 30s.
And obviously that prompted an emergency response from police and the ambulance service.
To find a scene like that is incredibly shocking, especially in this area.
Might have been hit by a car.
I'm not sure. Can you get them as quick as you can?
Medics pronounce the woman dead, and it is deemed as a potential hit and run.
Upon receiving the report, the police attended the location and immediately set up a crime scene, preventing others from accessing the road, so that the investigations can begin into what had happened and how it had happened.
West Mercia's Detective Chief Inspector Jerry Smith heads up the investigation.
We're currently standing in Wast Hills Lane, in the actual inner cordon in the scene itself. The pool of blood was located around this area. And then what you actually had as well were drag marks in blood leading across the road, which was obviously where the body had been dragged to place it in the ditch. The body was covered in debris and vegetable matter. When I initially attended the scene, officers thought that it could have been a non-stop fatal road traffic collision.
The grim discovery becomes the talk of the village.
This must have been a huge shock for the local residents, finding out that a body had been discovered in their locality.
That kind of, concern, because this is a place where things don't happen very often, would have been high, really high level.
Everybody did talk about it, and we were all going, oh my God, was she walking? Because we used to walk down that a lot. We used to go a nice long walk down to the canal.
I was keenly aware that going forward it was highly likely to raise significant concerns within that area, particularly at that time because we didn't have an identification of the body and we didn't know what type of incident we were actually dealing with.
But investigators have their work cut out, trying to establish what actually happened and the identity of the motorist who potentially hit her, then drove off.
The rural nature of the scene obviously means that we're going to get less likelihood of CCTV evidence and witness evidence because, as you can see, there's nobody around, just causing complexities to the investigation.
The police carry out an immediate investigation. They will have spoken to witnesses at the houses nearby, knocking on doors to see if anybody had heard or seen anything at the time, as well as conducting painstaking CCTV inquiries to try and identify the movements of the deceased.
The next priority in an investigation like this is to identify the body, to work out who this woman is.
The police identified a rucksack at the scene. Inside that rucksack was a mobile phone.
Fingerprints and DNA swabs were taken from the phone, and then it was opened up and identification details from the handset, from the SIM were taken. And then by making inquiries with the telecommunications provider, we managed to identify through our intelligence systems that it was Kerry. Kerry Owen was a 35-year-old mother of 5 children. She was initially from the Peterborough area.
The first Kerry's family hear about her death is via her boyfriend, Alan Edney.
It was 27th of May, and I sat at home, and my son received a phone call saying Kerry had died in a hit and run in Birmingham.
I was in my granddad's living room, and he got the call, and then he told me. He said that your mum has passed away. Everyone was just upset and shocked.
I got a phone call and he said to me that they were out camping and she ran off and got hit by a car, and the car drove off.
And he says, we was running across the farmer's field, and there was a gateway. He says, I think I thought I slipped and went through the gateway, and I looked at the side of me, and Kerry lay there with a hole in her head. And I see a black Peugeot 206 in the distance.
Obviously, I broke down, like, I was literally in tears. One of my sister's mates who I lived with, he broke down. He just hugged me and he goes, we're going to get justice for her one way.
Obviously, I was upset. You know, she's my friend. I've always looked out for her, and I felt let down that I couldn't protect her because I've always been there to protect her.
She was a kind-hearted person. You know, she'd do anything for anybody.
She would always look after Kyrie, who's my oldest son, buy him new clothes, feed him, change him. They would always be together.
Everyone really loved her, you know, like she was just like adorable and that.
While Kerry's family try to come to terms with the devastating news, investigators are examining the scene to try to establish what actually happened.
In the addresses nearby, some of those addresses had CCTV, and a vehicle had been seen leaving Wast Hills Lane at about 4 a.m. And relatively quickly, by attending a local address, we were able to work out that that was highly likely to be somebody that lived at one of those addresses and that was going to work. We were subsequently able to find that car and just reassure ourselves there was no damage or blood or anything on that car consistent with a road traffic collision.
DCI Smith also has other concerns when he re-examines the scene.
I found it immediately unusual that anyone would have stopped in those circumstances and particularly made the effort to cover up blood and deposit the body in a ditch and then cover the body as well. The lack of any tyre marks, the lack of any vehicle debris, to me indicated that it was not a road traffic collision.
And officers speaking to local residents also suspect all is not as it seems.
During some of the initial witness trawling, people had heard voices in the road.
CCTV from a nearby address points towards the area in the lane where the voices are coming from.
It didn't cover the scene, but crucially what it did have was audio. At approximately 4:05 that morning, you start to hear voices. It's difficult to hear, but it's clear there's two people and that someone is distressed, and then gradually those voices turn into screaming. There's some significant instance of violence occurring at that time in the road, and that lasts for about 5 minutes. I wasn't dealing with a road traffic collision, and it was highly likely to be a homicide.
In Hopwood, Worcestershire, 35-year-old mother of 5, Kerry Owen, has been found dead by the roadside in mysterious circumstances. After viewing nearby CCTV just hours before her body is discovered, police now suspect Kerry was murdered as she walked along Wast Hill Lane.
You hear parents screaming, and then later on, we hear more screaming. This is particularly significant because of the gap between the screaming that you hear may indicate 2 separate attacks.
"40 metres before Kerry's final resting place, police uncover evidence of that first attack.
This is the scene of what I think could have been the initial attack site, with blood was found on the ground, and in fact a dislodged tooth was found in this area as well by the fingertip search.
There was also some orange debris in the road. Officers thought it was a cigarette lighter, so straight away it became obvious there were two separate attack sites, two assaults. And that is then potentially corroborated by what you hear on the CCTV. There is a gap between the screaming, which may be consistent with an assault in one location, either Kerry moving herself or being dragged to the second location where she was finally killed.
When the post-mortem results come back, they reveal more about what happened to Kerry.
The pathologist found that Kerry had essentially been subjected to a savage beating. She had over 80 injuries on her body.
She suffered significant facial injuries. She had fractures to her nose. She had a tooth knocked out. She had a fracture to the hyoid bone in her neck. The injuries were terrible.
The final conclusion was that Kerry had died from blunt force trauma. Basically, she had been beaten to death.
We obviously had to identify her. You couldn't even recognise her. She was all swollen, she had black eyes, they'd had to shave all her hair off. Everything was just basically swollen and bruised.
She had a hole in her head. Obviously, I wanted to go and see her, and my niece, she was like, "Nah, don't, because it's going to scar you for life." She goes, "It's not a nice sight."
I just felt sick, you know, to think that how can somebody do that to somebody who won't even fight back? Kerry wouldn't have fought back.
The injuries are more consistent with a sustained attack. They aren't really consistent with a hit and run. So that's question marks over Alan Edney's story.
Her boyfriend's claims that she'd been hit by a black Peugeot 206 during their camping trip also don't add up.
If that happened to me, I'd be devastated. I'd be crying my eyes out. I'd be absolutely destroyed. He was so calm.
I thought it was a bit funny because I've known Kerry 21 years. Kerry doesn't do camping, you know, so I thought that seemed a bit strange.
I used to buy and sell cars and everything. I've never seen a Peugeot 206 black one in years. It must be a proper collector's car. It was unbelievable.
The last photos taken by Kerry's phone confirms the couple had indeed been camping in nearby woods. Officers seek out and find their campsite. But something else about Alan's story doesn't stack up.
Edney's account was that they had come from the campsite and for some reason decided to have a race. He'd got caught in the gate, and as that happened, he'd heard the sound of a collision and Kerry being hit by a vehicle, which didn't stop. And it just doesn't make sense that they would have climbed over this gate and she'd have been hit by a car. We're now hundreds of yards from the location where Kerry's body was found. The road traffic collision just didn't stand any scrutiny.
Alan Edney basically told some of Kerry's family members he had in fact called the police and an ambulance, and he had then attended a local hospital with Kerry where she was pronounced deceased.
He describes to his grandmother actually that he's had a statement taken by a police officer who had then dropped him back.
We found no evidence of any of that at all.
With Edney now firmly in their sights as a suspect, detectives dig deeper into his history with Kerry.
Kerry Owen first met Edney in March 2020 via a dating site.
I remember her saying to me she'd met a man on the internet from Birmingham.
And within a week, she moved to Birmingham with him.
First time we went down, we met him in the town centre and he seemed lovely.
I told her to really come back to Peterborough so she could be with her family, but she said no, she met the man of her dreams, basically.
All Kerry wanted in life was to be loved. And, you know, if somebody told her they loved her straight away, Kerry would be all for that, if you know what I mean. So she was sort of a bit vulnerable when it comes around relationships.
But barely a month into the budding romance, cracks begin to show.
She phoned me and told me that he was beating her up. And that's when I asked her, you know, to come back to Peterborough, to her dad's house, or come to my house. But, you know, she obviously stayed there.
She stayed in contact for a couple of months, then all of a sudden the phone calls stopped, Facebook stopped. I kept texting her, are you okay, are you okay? Nothing come back. We're worrying about her. Then the next thing, Kerry's texted me, she says he's in prison.
In 2021, there was a serious incident where Kerry and Alan's mum had taken a short holiday to Blackpool, and that resulted in a serious assault where Alan assaulted Kerry and his mum.
I think she rang me, she FaceTimed me and told me that he'd just been arrested, and she showed me her face and she had some, I think, some grazes or black eye. She had been in the hospital. She told me she'd been in the hospital. She had marks on her belly because he had stamped on her belly.
So I went there. That's when she told me as well she was pregnant with his baby.
For a man to assault his own mother and also assault his partner, especially when she's pregnant, kind of really paints the picture of the kind of man that Edney was, with this violent streak that ran through him.
I was obviously really shocked, and I was confused as well because he was obviously acting so nice when we went to Birmingham. But I was confused.
She was still sticking up for him. When you're in them kind of relationships, it's kind of hard to get out.
Edney is jailed for 6 months for the assault on Kerry and his mother.
She stayed in contact while he was in prison. It was we'd got our niece back and the kids had got their mum back. Then all of a sudden the contact stopped again.
Unfortunately, Kerry did maintain contact with Alan when he was in prison. When Alan was released from prison, he rekindled his relationship with Kerry, and they in fact lived together. He assaulted her again, and he was in fact on bail not to contact her.
Detectives uncover more worrying incidents involving Edney.
I went down there on bonfire night, and we all went round there. We done fireworks, and Alan got very drunk, and my mum had told him to stop drinking. He obviously kicked off about it, and then Alan started screaming at my mum, calling her all different names. He was verbally violent to her. So we were like, okay, we're going home.
It is the last time Yasmin sees her mum alive.
I feel bad for leaving her, but I had to put my kid first in that situation. I can't expect my kid to be around that.
Having delved into Edney's history, police investigating Kerry's death make a decision.
The police, having conducted their initial investigations, it became clear that Edney was the person who they wanted to arrest for this offence.
Once we'd identified a location for him, an address on the nearby Hawksley estate that was within walking distance of the crime scene, was in fact his grandmother's address. When officers attended Alan's nan's address, Alan was present, and he was arrested on suspicion of murder.
Police investigating the murder of mother of 5 Kerry Owen in Hopwood, Worcestershire, have arrested her partner, Alan Edney.
Edney was arrested on the evening of the 27th of May 2022. His family were entirely surprised at his arrest, given that they believed that Kerry Owen had died in a road traffic collision.
He didn't make any admissions. He, in fact, made no comment to all questions put to him during the interview process. But he did make comments outside of the process, indicating that he had an alibi and that he wasn't responsible for the offence.
Word spreads throughout the village and to Kerry's family back in Peterborough.
The police came round, my granddad's, and basically said Alan Edney has been arrested on suspicion of murder. It all made sense then, like it all adds up why he was lying, why people had been told different stories and stuff like that, and we all had to do our statements.
Meanwhile, police uncover more evidence about Edney's behaviour.
Our investigations into Alan Edney's history demonstrated that he had a significant history of domestic abuse on intimate partners, but also on his family members. There seemed to be a pattern where alcohol was a significant trigger for that offending behaviour. And we found a number of incidences in Alan Edney's past of significant domestic violence. One of those occurred on New Year's Day, 2018.
I was celebrating with friends. I came back and I heard my friend screaming. So I've gone all the way up and she's opened up the door, bright red-faced. I went, "You're right." She went, "Yeah, just like come in." And then I was dragged into the bedroom. They started like kicking me and punching me and I was on the floor. I did not do anything for him to do anything. It was just automatic kicking and punching. He was drunk. He'd been strangling her with a broom. You could physically see the broom was on the bed. At one stage I could get up so I could move because he went after her again. So I thought this is my easy way to get out. But I went the wrong way. And I went towards the window.
The woman claims Edney then pushed her halfway out of the window as her friend looked on in horror.
Next minute I know is I'm looking down. Well, I was literally near enough out the window and she literally dragged him back to pull me back in. I'd come back and he started kicking me again, but he was kicking me in the side, in the stomach, in the legs. My blood was all over the floor. My friend helped me try and get away. She shouted out, "She's pregnant." He went, "I don't care, another one can be dead then."
Edney's victim flees for her life. In March 2018, Edney pleaded guilty to assault and was jailed for 3.5 years.
To carry out an attack of that ferocity suggests a man with a serious violent tendency and where really there are no holds barred.
Mentally destroyed me. Physically destroyed me. I had to run from where I lived. Literally, I couldn't stay there. He was evil.
Following the attack, his victim posted warnings about Edney online, prompting his now-girlfriend Kerry Owen to reach out.
Kerry then contacted me and my friend. We persuaded her. He'd beat her up. But because she was pregnant with his son, she was like, "Oh, I still love him." Next thing I know is that she's dead. And that absolutely killed me. Because nobody listened. This could have been prevented. I swear it could have been prevented.
With Edney in police custody being questioned over Kerry's death, her family visit the scene of her murder.
So we stopped the car, and then we went and laid, you know, like the flowers, but you could still see Kerry's blood on the road, and that's what got me, is like I had to walk away. Felt like she was there kind of thing.
And this man and lady pulled up in a car, and I said, do you know what? I said, whoever found her must be destroyed. And this bloke says, I didn't want to tell you, I'm the man who found her. And basically destroyed him.
What kind of person could just leave someone laid in the road? She's just been left in the middle of nowhere.
This Alan Edney, he's ruined everybody. You know, from the person who found her to our family. Really, he's destroyed my family.
With Edney refusing to answer police questions, detectives need to build a case against him. They continue trawling CCTV from local residents to piece together his movements leading up to the murder.
The CCTV inquiries were able to map the movements of Edney and Kerry Owen. It showed that they'd been together in the afternoon of the 26th of May.
For some reason, Alan and Kerry had decided to go camping in a wooded area near Wast Hills Lane. They had gone to the wooded area earlier in the daytime when it was light to set up the campfire, and there's pictures on Kerry's phone of a makeshift shelter and a lot of wood stacked up. They had then gone back to Alan's nan's address, had a meal, spent some time there, before then making their way back up Wast Hills Lane to the campsite. And there's in fact some CCTV footage of them making that journey around 10 p.m. They spent 3.5 to 4 hours at the campsite, and there's a number of photographs on Kerry's phone of Alan at the campsite with a very large fire. He's likely to have consumed a lot of alcohol on that night, and there was evidence of alcohol being consumed at that location. For some reason unknown, they decided to leave the campsite in the early hours of the morning.
At around 4 a.m, the sound of an argument breaks out between the couple on CCTV. Then Kerry is heard, fighting for her life.
It's a sustained attack for several minutes, and then it's silence.
Police then make a breakthrough. Their suspect is spotted on CCTV in broad daylight, alone.
Around 50 minutes later, the CCTV captured Edney leaving the locality of the scene.
Wearing a distinctive T-shirt that he's shown wearing on Kerry's mobile phone.
He's wiping his hands, and he looks a bit agitated, he looks quite erratic, and he kind of walks down the lane, then turns off.
A search of Edney's home seals his fate.
When officers searched the address, there was a particularly significant find. The clothing that he'd been wearing on the night, the distinctive T-shirt with the motive on the front, tracksuit bottoms and trainers, which we could see on the CCTV video and also on Kerry's mobile phone photograph. That was found in a bin bag behind a cupboard in the kitchen area of the address.
The bag of clothes appear to have blood on them.
The police submitted the clothing that had been hidden by Edney for DNA analysis, and the blood on that clothing was found to be Kerry Owen's.
Everything is starting to come together for the police in their investigation.
3 days after Alan Edney was arrested on suspicion of the murder of Kerry Owen, the Crown Prosecution Service made the decision to charge him with murder.
In Hopwood, Worcestershire, Alan Edney has been charged with the murder of his girlfriend, mother of 5, Kerry Owen. But the hard graft doesn't stop for the investigators.
Even though Alan Edney had been charged with murder, I'd say that the period leading up to a trial does involve an element of nervousness on behalf of the investigation team. There's a lot more detailed work that has to be completed to get the case ready for trial.
The police will still carry on trying to gather as much evidence. They're still pursuing anything they can to really kind of seal this case.
We had employed a number of forensic experts in the case. One of those was an odontologist. By ensuring a detailed fingertip search of the scene, we'd managed to find a tooth, and the odontologist was able to mechanically fit that tooth into Kerry's jaw to show that her tooth had been knocked out during the assault. Linear marks that were found on Kerry's face. I was concerned that could have meant there was a weapon that had missing, because we were never able to get any support from a forensic expert that Alan Edney's wear was what had left those marks on her face. But ultimately there was not any evidence of a weapon being used, and it's likely that he'd used his hands and feet as his weapons.
The CPS and the police think it's built up a really strong case against Edney, but it's now over to the lawyers and for the case to go to court.
I was in a really bad way. My head was like all over. It was like I couldn't sleep, because it was like, is he gonna get found like guilty? Is he gonna or is he gonna walk? I didn't know what was gonna happen in that.
Kerry's family come face to face once again with her killer.
I was nervous, and then obviously during the court case, I was even more nervous. He was just sitting there, giving me like evil looks.
I just stared at him. You know, if looks could kill, he'd have been dead. Just to let him know, like, he might have took my niece's life, but he's not took the rest of ours. Do you know what I mean?
My sister, he was laughing in her face in the court, like he just didn't care.
There was just no remorse or sadness whatsoever when this is a woman who's had your baby. He had no remorse for what he'd done.
The court hears the harrowing evidence of Kerry's last moments.
They did say, we're about to play it. If you would like to leave the room, then leave.
The last time I ever heard my niece screaming for her life was on that man's CCTV. So, it's horrible, really. And then you get told in the court he was still kicking her and beating her after she was dead, basically. So he must have beat her to a pulp.
His defence at court was effectively that he admitted responsibility for Kerry's death, but that was on the grounds of provocation and diminished responsibility. Edney's defence was essentially that Kerry had brought up on the night issues around him being abused himself as a child, and then that had provoked him into acting the way he did.
Edney blames his brutal attack on mental illness and a loss of control.
The psychiatrist agreed that Edney suffered from a mental abnormality. However, we were able to prove that that abnormality of mind did not contribute towards his behaviour on that day. Part of the evidence put forward was the previous assaults upon both Kerry Owen and other partners. That helped us prove to the jury that Edney knew what he was doing when he killed Kerry Owen.
The prosecution also outlines how calm and collected Edney was in the aftermath of the crime, and how he spent time covering his tracks.
At that time of year in May, leaf matter would have been readily available. He used some of that to cover up a significant pooling of blood in the middle of the road, but then he also dragged Kerry's body into a deep ditch nearby, deposited her in there, and then covered her with a significant amount of vegetation which he took from undergrowth nearby. It was really important for the prosecution to paint a detailed picture of the web of lies, the accounts that he'd provided to his own family and Kerry's family, and we didn't find any evidence to show that Kerry was likely to have provoked him to violence in that way.
In fact, Edney hadn't lost his control. He knew exactly what he was doing.
It was in the hands of the jury from that point. I think there's always an element of nervousness.
You do not know how the jury view the case, so naturally there is an apprehension. The jury unanimously found Edney guilty of murder.
We were all well happy. We were all jumping up and down on the seating area. We were all bouncing up and down on there, shouting. We were all happy.
I think the overwhelming emotion was one of relief that we had delivered justice for Kerry Owen, her family, and also to help to protect the wider public from Edney.
Alan Edney is jailed for life with a minimum of 20 years.
He is, in my view, a significant danger to women, and I think that result protects other women from potentially becoming similar victims.
It ensures that Edney will be behind bars for a very long time.
Justice was served, but I don't think the sentence was hard enough. It's basically probably destroyed our family. The man's evil.
He's took a mother away from her 5 children. That's the monster. Hopefully he'll never get out. You know, the best thing to him to do is die in jail.
The murder is forever etched in the memory of the village of Hopwood.
It will have a lasting impact on this community. It's such a horrendous crime on their doorstep in such a, what is otherwise a lovely place to live. And that will be with them for a long time.
For the people who live there, you know, this is kind of a blot on their history and something that I don't think any of them will forget.
But it's Kerry's family in Peterborough who were left to pick up the pieces.
When someone's took away from you instantly, so young, it's so hard, I think, to carry on.
There was some harsh moments, you know, where I tried taking my life. It's like I just wanted to like be with her because I basically like lost her, and not just like a sister, it's like a best, you know, like a best friend, and like I just like miss her and that.
So it's sad, really. It's sad for them all. She's, you know, missed by everyone.
She never got to meet my youngest kids. My kids can't now grow up the way they were growing up. Now it all has to change because she can't be there.
Even the grandchildren, they always look in stars and say, Nanny. It's just heartbreaking, really.
He just couldn't believe that he'd lost another son. Just really broke him.
When the villagers found out, they were shocked because it's such a quiet, peaceful village.
It was a pre-planned and well thought out murder.
In April 2003, the Nottingham village of Edwinstowe was shocked by the news that one of its residents had been found dead in the room of a local hotel, with his wrists and his neck elaborately bound. Was this a bondage session gone wrong? Or was it murder? In the heart of Sherwood Forest is the Nottinghamshire village of Edwinstowe. Legend has it that the village church was where Robin Hood married Maid Marian, and it still retained all of its charm.
Edwinstowe is a quiet village. It's a very tight-knit community, lots of very friendly people, people willing to talk to you on the street and help you out when you're in need.
On the evening of 25th of April 2003, panicked Edwinstowe resident Carol Croydon contacted her brother-in-law concerned about her missing husband, Philip.
I had a phone call from Carol asking me if Phil was with me. I said, no, he's not with me. Why, was there a problem? She said he'd gone missing and she didn't know where he was. I was just a little worried because it just wasn't like Phil to do that, you know, to disappear without saying anything to anyone. I left it for probably 15, 20 minutes and thinking, you know, what could have happened, where could he have gone? So I called Phil on his mobile. It went straight to Anne's phone as though his phone was switched off. After that, I rang Carol and said, look, I've tried to contact Phil. His phone's just gone straight to voicemail and, you know, I don't know where he is. I contacted my sister, I think, then, and told her what was going off, but not to tell my parents because the amount of stress they've suffered in the past with losing 2 other children. So I didn't want to worry them, so we kept it to ourselves that, you know, we couldn't find Phil and no one knew where he was.
Although he hadn't told his parents, Stephen did share his concerns with his sister.
He told me that Phil had gone missing and he'd been missing overnight, but I shouldn't worry about it because he'd spoken to Carol and Carol had said that she thought maybe Phil was suffering from depression.
Initially, Carol's assurances did the job of calming the family down, but it didn't last long, and they reported Philip missing to the police before going to bed.
I had a few hours sleep, and then when I woke in the morning, the first thing I did was to ring Carol to see if he'd turned up at home. He wasn't at home, and then I just rang his mobile again, and it went straight to Ant's phone again. At that point, I decided maybe I should go and look for him because if it fell out, he may have gone somewhere and just parked up for the night and spent the night in his car. I came and parked down here on the Saturday morning about 8:30 because this is the area where myself and my brother used to fish all the time. I went over to the nature reserve area first, which is one of the popular fishing spots where we used to go. Couldn't see anything. Then went down to the church over there, nothing down there. I then drove across the bridge and down towards the river, searching all the lakes, but I couldn't see anything.
By now, Stephen's brother Philip had been missing for over 10 hours.
At that point, I was very worried because him not responding to any calls, not letting anyone know where he was, totally out of character for Phil. Normally, you know, he's very family loving and he wouldn't put us through any, especially my mum and dad, he wouldn't put us through that sort of stress. So at that point, I feared there was something worse.
I'd just got flashes of my mum and dad
running through my mind, thinking, you know, how they're going to cope, losing another brother, another son.
In the early hours of the 26th of April, a shocking discovery was made 36 miles from Edwinstowe.
We received a phone call from an employee of a hotel that had found a body in the bedroom of the hotel. Officers arrived at the room in question, and it was immediately apparent that there was blood at the scene, and the man himself had got his hands tied. He'd also got a scarf across his eyes, at the back of his head. It's certainly an unusual set of circumstances.
Immediately, police set about organising what they believed to be a crime scene.
Police officers took steps to secure the corridor and the room itself so that no one else was allowed anywhere near it. The senior officer called out for the forensic services and the pathologist to attend the scene. Certainly they spent some considerable time there taking samples for fingerprints, DNA, fibres, that sort of thing. It was apparent from the amount of blood around that it was a suspicious incident. We were able to identify the man, Mr. Philip Croydon, and that was from his driving licence.
Philip's wife Carol and his family were completely unaware that their worst fears had been realised, but it was the police's job to inform them of the news.
When officers told Carol Croydon that her husband had been found dead in a hotel, she was clearly very distressed.
She was hysterical at the time. She was really, really distraught. She couldn't understand what he'd been doing in a hotel room, and she wanted answers.
Unaware their brother had been found dead, Stephen and Sandra were on their way to Carol's in Edwinstowe to make sure she was okay.
I received a call and was on the way up there to say that Phil had been found in a hotel and he was dead.
It was such a shock that I kind of panicked a little bit, but it's happened and we've got to go and face and find out what the story is.
Stephen and Sandra continued their journey to see their sister-in-law.
When we got to the house, Carol was there. She was upset, but probably not as upset as the rest of us.
When we walked in the house, there were probably 5 or 6 police officers there, because Carol had fed him the information that Phil was depressed. So Steve said, I hope he hasn't committed suicide. Obviously thinking about my mum and dad again, Steve, we need to tell my mum and dad. And so the 2 police liaison officers drove with us up to my mum and dad's house.
First went to the parents' address, to Ted and Marg, and the rest of the family were all at their house. I was with a colleague at the time. There was brother and sister, Steve and Sandra. Employed as a family liaison officer, involved with interaction with the victim's family, to interview them about the victim, the lifestyle, the background of that person, and to liaise with them and keep them fully updated with every step of the investigation.
My dad knew straight away that something bad was wrong, and I told him that Phil had died. My dad was probably worse than my mum. He was absolutely distraught. He was in bits. Just kept saying, God, why? Just didn't. He couldn't deal with it. I think with losing 2 sons before that, he just couldn't believe that he'd lost another son. So, just really broke him.
Despite having just received the heartbreaking news about their son, Philip Croydon's parents' thoughts quickly turned to his widow.
Carol stopped and spoke to my dad and my mum for a little while, and then made her excuses, saying she had a headache and she wanted to go to bed. and would I help her to get in bed. My dad kissed Carol as she went upstairs to bed and told her to try and get some rest.
The family grieved and tended to a distraught Carol.
I went to help her get undressed and put some pyjamas on and get into her bed while we all sat downstairs, you know, discussing and kind of guessing what might have happened to Phil.
In the hotel, the police investigation was unearthing more details surrounding Philip Croydon's death.
The Home Office pathologist arrived at the scene, examined the body of Mr Croydon, and it became apparent that he'd received numerous stab wounds to the back of the neck and also to the chest. The ties that had been tied to his wrists and the scarf that had been placed over his head, it was his opinion that these had been placed or tied on after death. They were so tight that there was no discoloration of the wrists, or no reaction when they were untied. And in relation to the scarf that had been placed over his head, he suggested that that would have fallen off in an assault. So it was quite clear that this had happened after death. And it was our opinion that whoever had done this had wanted to make it look like a sexually orientated assault.
Now police were certain they had a murder case on their hands. And whilst Carol was grieving with the Croydon family, they checked a new potential lead. CCTV footage of the previous night from the hotel cameras was found and examined. It showed Philip Croydon entering the hotel alone at 5:09. What officers were hoping was that it would identify Philip Croydon's killer. The police were one day into investigating the death of Philip Croydon from the Nottinghamshire village of Edwinstowe. He'd been found in a local hotel room with multiple stab wounds and his hands and neck bound. Philip's wife Carol had reported him missing on the night of the killing. Police had already concluded this wasn't a sex game gone wrong, but murder, and they hoped the hotel's CCTV footage would help with their inquiries.
As two detectives viewed CCTV footage from the hotel.
Armed with the details of all the Croydon family vehicles, 20 minutes after Philip had checked in, police made a surprising discovery.
Mrs Croydon's car was seen entering the hotel on the Friday evening, and a lady who got out of the car fitted the description of Mrs Croydon. That was clearly very irregular to what she'd said to us about where she was the night before and the fact that her husband was out playing cards.
Then officers saw Carol leaving in different clothes 40 minutes later.
The two officers spoke to the senior investigating officer and immediately then went to Edwinstowe, saw Miss Croydon, and she was arrested on suspicion of murder.
The family liaison officer, Matt Spradbury, was there to see the reaction to this new turn of events.
It was a massive shock to the family that she'd been arrested on suspicion of his murder.
I couldn't believe it. I said, look, you've got to be wrong, this can't be right. You've made a mistake. I just couldn't believe that she'd done it.
All the police activity outside the Croydon house in Edwinstowe started to attract attention in the village.
So the village of Edwinstowe is a very nice, quaint, leafy village, very close to Sherwood Forest. It's a lovely place to live, and for journalists there was a massive interest, and for us we obviously covered it every single day.
Carol Croydon was taken to Wigston Police Station in Leicester to explain how she happened to be checking into the same hotel as the husband she had reported missing.
The police obviously looked into her story, and they looked at the CCTV from the hotel, and there was Carol Croydon at the hotel. Apparently she had no knowledge that her husband was there, and she was going to see him, and she was also filmed leaving the hotel. Police could then prove that she did know where he had been.
She was obviously aware that officers had got her going into the hotel on CCTV. She told police officers that she'd gone there to meet her husband, to engage in a swingers session with another couple who we call Brian and Linda.
Whilst Carol was being interviewed in custody, the family wanted as many updates as possible and were waiting eagerly to find out whether there were going to be any charges against her. I had contact with Philip's brother Stephen in the main, and he was adamant that I made a personal visit to them to keep them updated no matter what time it was.
Carol Croydon said that she left the hotel room, she left Brian and Linda in the hotel room with her husband, and that she'd lost her nerve and gone.
This didn't sit right with me at all because Phil just isn't like that. Never would have even entered his mind to do anything like that.
Phil was very quiet and very shy, and certainly that was totally out of character. So then that made me think, what has she done?
The police went on the hunt for Brian and Linda, the swingers from room 328.
Whilst Mrs. Croydon was being interviewed, officers were checking the CCTV footage of the hotel. There was no evidence whatsoever of anyone else going into the room where Mr. Croydon was found. So it soon became very apparent to officers on the investigation that Mrs. Croydon was telling us a lie.
Whilst the family tried to come to terms with events, and after the police had failed to find Brian and Linda on the hotel CCTV, they expanded their investigation to Carol's house in Edwinstowe.
Mrs. Croydon was in custody. There's a lot of actions that are going on behind the scene. We have a lot of detectives who are working on this case.
3 days after Philip's death, the police made a discovery.
Officers carried out a forensic search of her home address and found in a dustbin a carrier bag which contained blood marks, which subsequently, upon testing, turned out to be the blood of Mr. Croydon.
The police continued their search, uncovering plane tickets to Dublin for Carol and a male passenger flying 2 days after Philip's death. With this new evidence, they questioned Carol again.
She was asked about a number of contacts that were held in a mobile phone. There was a gentleman in the contacts that she described as being a friend and a shoulder to cry on. However, behind the scenes, officers were making inquiries into the various individuals concerned, and this particular individual, it soon became apparent from what officers found that he was more than just a casual friend, if you like, and possibly somebody that she may have been having some sort of relationship with.
It wasn't long before Carol changed her story.
When she was further interviewed, she introduced this person to us as somebody that she was having a relationship with. Mrs. Croydon told police officers that her boyfriend had come to the hotel, come into the room, and told her to leave, later meeting up with him in the evening. He then told her that she wouldn't be seeing her husband again.
Police acted fast, and Carol's lover was arrested.
The following interview, she then actually changed the story and actually said to police officers that her boyfriend burst into the hotel room and stabbed her husband Philip several times, and she actually witnessed him do that. So we've got a change, if you like, of the two interviews, from actually letting him in and asking him to leave to, secondly, from actually watching him do it. She was asked, how did her boyfriend get into the room? How did he burst into the room? She was unable to answer that.
Could it be that Carol is so enmeshed with her lover? Is she wanting to protect him? Is she covering for him? And would that explain why actually the stories so far really haven't been very believable at all?
While Carol's lover was in custody, the police were checking out his movements at the time of the murder.
We're able to actually eliminate a boyfriend through his mobile phone, which actually put him in a different part of the country, and he couldn't possibly have been anywhere near the incident scene.
The police looked into his story very carefully to discount him from the murder, and they proved that it would have been impossible for the lover to get to the hotel in time and leave. They retraced his route very carefully, they timed it, and they made it sure that they could prove that he was not involved.
Philip's family continued to be kept informed of events by police.
It was like as if Phil had died all over again, because the first story obviously wasn't true. So then she was telling us this. So then it was like putting us through that torture of losing Phil all over again, but in a different way.
Once we discovered that her boyfriend could not possibly have been involved with the murder, he was released from custody. We then presented the evidence that we'd got so far to the CPS, who proposed that we charge Mrs. Croydon with murder.
After 13 separate interviews, and 5 days since Philip Croydon's body was discovered in room 328, his wife Carol was charged with murder.
There was sort of a sense of relief there that, you know, we knew what had happened.
News of the murder charge against Carol quickly spread through the community.
When the villagers found out, they were shocked, because it's such a quiet, peaceful village. Everybody were talking about it at that time, because it was so unusual.
Police started to build a picture of the days leading up to Philip Croydon's death. But to establish murder, they would have to prove Carol had a motive.
We made inquiries at Carol Croydon's place of work, and CCTV showed that she left at 2 minutes to 5. She'd actually signed out at 20 past 5. We thought that showed some sort of planning on her behalf to buy herself some 20 minutes of time.
With Carol in custody, the police continued with their investigation.
We made inquiries at Carol Croydon's place of work, and it became apparent that there was a knife missing, some sort of cheese knife, but we were never able to fully establish the time it went missing.
On the morning of the 25th of April 2003, police believed Carol left home for work with a number of neckties and a change of clothes in her possession. Had Carol set out that day with murder on her mind? The case was building, but who knew what was around the corner? In Nottinghamshire, police were dealing with a murder investigation that was continually changing direction, but they were determined to find the truth. 5 days after Philip Croydon had been found stabbed in a hotel room near the village of Edwinstowe, his wife Carol had been charged with his murder. She'd already changed her story on 3 occasions, wasting police time and resources, but there was more to come. Whilst Carol was on remand awaiting trial, yet another version of events emerged. She now said Philip had asked her to tie him up.
As a child, she'd been sexually abused by various people. She said that she'd had flashbacks to her childhood, which caused her to inflict the stab wounds to her husband, which subsequently killed Mr. Croydon.
At this stage, it's quite clear that Carol has committed the killing. So really, the only other option for her is to try and get a reduced sentence by saying that it was diminished responsibility.
Carol blamed flashbacks to her childhood, and that had sent her into a blind rage, and she couldn't remember doing anything, but just found herself standing over Phil's body, and Phil was dead.
I've worked with a lot of patients who have flashback phenomenon, and they are very strong, vivid memories. What tends to happen though is that people go back to how they felt whilst that memory was formed. So what I would expect was for Carol to have felt small, helpless, immobilised with fear.
With Carol now claiming she hadn't committed murder, it was the police's job to prove it was premeditated. So they looked into Carol and Philip's life together in the search for a motive.
Carol's past was always kind of kept a bit of a, not a secret, but she never wanted to discuss it. And if you asked her questions about her past, which you could tell made her feel uncomfortable, she would move on to another subject.
Philip Croydon and Carol got married on the 17th of June 2000 at St Peter's Church in the Derby suburb of Chellaston.
Our first impressions were good. I mean, Phil was obviously clearly madly in love with her, even though he'd not known her for very long. Carol was seemed very friendly, but she was a little bit secretive about her past and her family. We knew she'd been adopted, she told us that much, but that was about all she did tell us.
Philip's father told me during my interview with him that he didn't know very much about Carol's background or much about her, and he potentially wasn't too trusting with her.
Phil kind of changed a little bit. I got the feeling that she was feeding him, this is what you should do, this is what you should say.
Police discovered that Philip went out of his way to try and give Carol everything she desired.
She was very materialistic. Everything with Carol was all about money and how people might perceive her, you know, down to the car that she had, the pedigree cats that she had. Everything was all about how it looked to other people.
This was also noted by family liaison officer Matt Spradbury.
They both had, at the time, brand new Toyota sports vehicles. The home address was beautifully furnished and a very nice big house. It's quite clear that Carol liked to have nice clothes as well from some of the search work we did, and liked to have nice things in her life.
The investigation continued, and officers uncovered that Carol's lavish lifestyle with Philip was in stark contrast to her upbringing.
There's no doubt that Carol had not come from ideal circumstances. That leads me to think that maybe she'd inherited some sort of predisposition towards antisocial behaviour. Or at the very least, maybe her early experiences in those first 2 years of when she was still with her mother and her father were so damaging that it affected her ability to form close, meaningful attachments to people in her life, and particularly men in her life.
Philip's family may have been unaware of Carol's background, but they were now under no illusions that she had killed Philip.
The police had just drip-fed us the information as time had gone on, and each time she'd changed the story. I think it wasn't a shock what she'd done, because we knew a different person to the person that she was portraying.
When the pathology report came back, it didn't seem to point to a vulnerable woman who was protecting herself as she was claiming.
Carol entered room 328, where her husband was waiting. She performed a sex act on her husband, and then she got a 4-inch cheese knife out of her bag and began to stab him.
On examination of Mr. Croydon, found that he'd been stabbed 22 occasions, 2 to the chest, 20 to the neck area.
Philip Croydon bled to death. He had superficial cuts to his left hand that implied that he'd tried to grasp the blade as it was plunged into him, and that he'd possibly been trying to fight back, save his life.
The attack was very frenzied, but then it had to be in order to get Philip dead quickly so that he couldn't overpower her, maybe use the knife against her in self-defence. So she had to be committed to a very, very brutal and sudden attack, and she was. She severed his spinal cord with one blow, so she wasn't taking any chances.
This horrific attack on Philip had been carried out with a cheese knife that fitted the description of one that had gone missing from Carol's workplace a few weeks before.
Here we've got a direct link between Carol and the murder weapon. Now, I can imagine why somebody planning a night of romps with their husband might pack neckties and scarves, but pack a cheese knife? That's something that's a bit more difficult to explain.
With Carol's stories not adding up, Ascertaining what was fact and what was fiction in Carol Croydon's life wasn't proving to be simple for police. Carol Croydon was accused of murdering her husband Philip and leaving him tied up in a Nottinghamshire hotel room, trying to make it look like a bondage session gone wrong. Having already changed her story numerous times, Carol was now claiming diminished responsibility due to a life of abuse. Police were still busy trying to prove a motive, and thus murder.
There just seemed to be no motive whatsoever for killing her husband, except that she stood to inherit the £300,000 family home in Edwinstowe and an insurance policy.
Police carried on with their investigations and went through the hotel bookings on the night of the killing.
A neighbouring couple who were in the next room to Mr Croydon reported hearing noises at the relevant time of the incident and a voice saying, "Don't, don't."
Officers continued trying to prove that Carol's motive was financial. Looking into her and Philip's relationship was key to their case.
He met Carol at work. Carol went there as an accountant, and after a short period of time they developed problems with the company. Carol was fired from her position. Phil was that much in love with her. He felt that he had to give his notice in as well, so they both went at the same time.
Detectives soon discovered a side to Carol that she'd kept hidden from everyone, including her besotted husband.
She'd made a lot of false statements, if you like. She'd got a false driving licence in terms of her date of birth. Her birth certificate had been falsified, again with the date of birth. Her passport, even a national insurance number. She'd made herself appear 4 years younger than what she actually was. She was also, it was found that she'd applied for an accountancy course and falsified her qualifications. That enabled her to get a role later on in life as an accountant. Clearly, there's a lot of things going on in the background here that just didn't add up with Mrs Croydon.
What police were discovering was that Carol Croydon's whole life was nothing more than a tangled web of lies. What they needed to do was prove that her claim of diminished responsibility was just another one.
Carol said that she'd been abused, sexually abused, physically abused throughout her life and by various different men. It might provide some sort of reason for why she's so willing to really take advantage of any of the men in her life and why she was angry towards her partner to the extent that actually divorcing him wasn't enough. She wanted to kill him.
After an investigation lasting more than 6 months, the police believed they had enough evidence to convict Carol of murder. But it would all be meaningless if her defence could prove diminished responsibility. On January the 28th, 2004, the case against Carol Croydon went to Nottingham Crown Court.
She was brought into court, sat in the dock, very calmly, as all the charges were read out to the jury. There was one charge, because it was murder. I just remember her being very, very calm and cool in the circumstances. She was facing a murder charge.
The prosecution presented their case, witnesses came and gave their evidence. The defence went down the line of provocation. Mrs Croydon was suggesting that her childhood she'd suffered sexual abuse by a number of people and that she'd suffered provocation into murdering her husband.
The whole of Philip's family were in court from the first day.
Carol didn't show any emotion. When she stood there, there was just a look of fear, but not any emotion showing at all. It was just like shock that she'd been caught.
The extent of Carol's colossal amount of lying was laid out in every detail for the jury.
There's only one witness to the crime, obviously, which was Carol Croydon, and she didn't give evidence about that. So the jury were reliant on the explanations that she gave to the police at the time, and there were varying explanations as to what happened and what her involvement was that changed. And that was probably one of the most interesting parts of the case, about how she had told lie after lie to the point where she couldn't remember what happened.
To be a good liar, you have to construct a very plausible lie, and then you have to stick to it really quite rigidly. And this is where she comes unstuck, because Carol has to have points for flair and imagination, but when it comes to consistency and believability, she really does fall down. She's too much of a fantasist.
The jury then heard Carol's final version of events.
Mrs. Croydon admitted that she'd stabbed her husband many, many times, but she'd had a blackout, and that when she came to, she was just standing over his body and couldn't actually recall the actual incident itself. This was viewed by a psychiatrist in court as being very unusual in the circumstances. He said it was possible, but he doubted it. She's fitted each account to try and deceive, and hopefully she was hoping to get away with convincing people, but obviously when she's presented with the truth, she has to change her story.
The prosecution introduced the evidence from the crime scene, starting with the pathology report.
The pathologist in court found the neckties around his wrists had not been soaked in blood, which implied that it had been tied around his wrists after he'd been attacked.
What the chambermaid saw would have appeared to a layperson as a sexual misadventure, a sexually motivated offence. But actually, it doesn't take too close an inspection to work out that it's not all as it seems. And when a crime scene has been cleverly constructed to look like something it isn't, there's a reason for that. Somebody wants to distance themselves. So if somebody wants to distance themselves from a murder, the chances are that they're actually very, very close. And you can't be more close to this murder than a husband and a wife.
Sitting in court, Carol's web of lies were harrowing for Philip's loved ones.
We all went every day for nearly 3 weeks. Some days it was difficult. You know, you didn't want to get in the car, you didn't want to go and listen to the information that you knew you were going to have to sit through again, and kind of see my mum and dad's faces and how everybody felt, and it was very upsetting and very draining, and obviously something that took the family years and years to get over, and I really don't think my dad ever got over it.
Towards the end of the trial, the prosecution called in a psychologist to talk about Carol's alleged state of mind at the time of the killing.
Carol says that she was very, very depressed. She was depressed as a result of problems in her marriage, and she was depressed as a result of trauma in her history. But the classic symptoms of depression are lack of libido, lack of motivation, lack of concentration and ability to plan ahead, general purpose apathy. Now that's actually the antithesis of what we're seeing with Carol, because this is somebody who was able to plan and execute a murder and also maintain several affairs.
What the jury was told by the expert witness was to be key in the case against Carol Croydon.
He's concluded that Mrs. Croydon couldn't have been suffering from any mental disability or depression at the time of the killing.
With that, Carol Croydon's defence of diminished responsibility collapsed. It was the moment Philip's family had been waiting for.
At this point during the trial, they were now beginning to think, she's responsible for this, and they just wanted that justice to be done.
After almost a 3-week trial, a jury of 7 women and 5 men retired to consider Carol Croydon's various accounts of the events on the evening of the 25th of April 2003. After just 3 hours, they'd reached a verdict.
On February 12, 2004, Carol Croydon was convicted of the murder of her husband at Nottingham Crown Court. She broke down uncontrollably in the dock when the jury came back with the verdict. She clutched a tissue to her head.
I think when the judge found her guilty, I'm sure I screamed. It was panic. I was thankful that she'd been found guilty, but at the same time, you know, still kind of just thinking about Phil and what, you know, we were never going to see him again.
On convicting Mrs. Croydon, the judge said in his summing up that he was quite satisfied that she'd committed a sex act on him, got him at his weakest point, and it was at that point that she murdered him.
The judge sentenced Carol to life imprisonment set at a minimum term of 16 years. He told her that she was a cold-hearted, cold-blooded killer who tried to blame others for being responsible for her husband's murder.
This Carol Croydon case wasn't a sudden loss of self-control during an argument. It was a pre-planned and well-thought-out murder.
All along, Carol's allegations of abuse had just been more lies. Philip's family struggled to see the 16-year sentence as justice.
The sentence can never be long enough for anyone to do something like that, to take another life deliberately and never show any remorse, which she hasn't. She's never ever admitted to it, never shown any remorse, never apologised. And to do something like that, my opinion is people who are 100% guilty, there's no doubt whatsoever, they should stay in prison the rest of their life.
When she was found guilty, she sat in the dock and she sobbed, presumably for the fact that she wouldn't be able to live the great life that she'd led in the past, not for the fact of she'd taken our brother away from us, and she killed him in such a horrible way that would be emblazoned on all our minds forever.
After the verdict, Philip's dad, Ted Croydon, read a statement in which he said, "I curse this woman every day I wake. I call on God that she cannot sleep, that she knows no peace of mind, that her food is harsh in her mouth and without taste, that her thirst cannot be quenched, that she sees no sun or the beauty of nature, that she hears no bird's song." He added, "That woman is the devil incarnate, nothing but an evil witch."
I absolutely hate her as much as I did the day that she did it. I hate her just as much, not just for what she did to Phil, but what she's put my family through. It's unforgivable. My father was never the same. It ruined his life, it changed him completely. He was a broken man. He died a broken man. I'll never ever forgive her for that.
Because Carol Croydon refused to take the stand, no one will ever know for certain what happened in room 328 on the 25th of April 2003. But perhaps the most surprising aspect of the whole case is that Carol's lover left his wife and at time of sentencing still wanted a future with her, despite the fact that she named him as the killer, hoping to evade justice.
Clock in for startling footage exposing the reality of frontline policing Saturday at 9 in Brickham. Emergency on our streets.
Why am I naked? Bringing a drunk person into your room is the worst. I enjoyed the company trip banquet, but I never expected to be yelled at for helping my drunken boss. I tried to explain desperately, but the next workday, my boss glared at me as she arrived. "I need to talk to you. Come to the conference room." I gulped nervously. That look on her face didn't promise a pleasant conversation. When I steeled myself and headed to the conference room, she locked the door and cornered me against the wall. "Hey, did you like my..." "What?" "My name is Alex. I'm just an ordinary office worker. I dislike standing out, so I always try to keep a low profile at work. However, that often doesn't go as planned, and no matter how much I try to stay unnoticed, situations arise that make it impossible. It's never because I did something. It's usually because of my direct boss. Her name is Emily. I'm basically her right-hand man, doing everything she needs. I don't mind the work itself at all, but there's something else that worries me every day. When I first started working under her, I thought she was incredibly competent. Because of that, I found the workplace very comfortable and easy to work in. However, that impression gradually deteriorated over time. The beginning of the change was a lunch outing to a diner, while we were on a business trip. As soon as we entered the diner, I felt countless stares like never before. It wasn't just one person looking at us. I felt eyes on us from all directions. No wonder, because the diner we entered, including the owner, was full of men. And their dazed looks were all directed at Emily. The stares I felt weren't aimed at me, but at her, who was walking close to me. As soon as we sat down, the owner, uninvited, came over with a smile and persistently asked for her order. The other customers kept glancing at her while pretending to eat their meals. Even though I knew the stares weren't meant for me, just being in that space was torture. However, she seemed completely unfazed and continued as usual after placing her order. From my experiences working with Emily, I realized she was very attentive to her superiors and considerate towards me and other juniors. She was always observant of her surroundings. Someone like her, who pays such close attention, couldn't possibly be unaware of the discomforting stares she received. I realized she endured these stares daily, seemingly unbothered. It made me genuinely admire her strength. However, becoming aware of this shattered my peace of mind. Since the incident at the diner, I became hyper-aware of everything happening around her. I hadn't noticed it before, but she attracted a lot of attention even within the company. Especially from male employees, who would make uncomfortable remarks, or casually ask her out during work conversations. Things that would make me visibly uncomfortable happened to her regularly. Although it didn't directly involve me, she was my direct superior. Given how much she helped me, I couldn't help but feel concerned for her. Thinking about her feelings made it unbearably painful for me. And since she was always in the spotlight, the attention also extended to me as her subordinate. I became sensitive to the attention around me, initially because of her, but eventually towards myself too. The most common reaction was jealousy. She was admired by many as an ideal woman. Working under someone like her was a privilege, regardless of gender. And I'm the only one working in that position. So, it's natural for the jealousy and resentment to be directed at me. Even so, after becoming aware of it, my work life was far from peaceful. I've overheard other male employees talking about me behind my back. How can he be so indifferent working under such a beautiful boss? Maybe he's not into women? If it were me, I wouldn't leave her alone. If he's not interested, I wonder if we can switch positions? To be honest, I've never had those kinds of feelings for Emily. Once, Emily casually asked me, "Alex, do you have a girlfriend?" while having a small talk. I replied, "No, I don't. By the way, about this schedule." And switched back to work topics, fully focused on my tasks. In fact, I've never had romantic feelings for any woman at the workplace. I hadn't thought deeply about it before, but I probably disliked the idea of mixing personal and professional life. However, female employees see this as seriousness and rate me highly as a stoic man. Alex is such a good worker and a nice guy. I heard he doesn't have a girlfriend right now. Maybe I'll make a move. I overheard such comments, but they didn't particularly make me happy. Hey, Alex? Are you listening? Sorry. I wasn't. What did you say? It seemed I was lost in thought during work, while Emily was speaking. When I looked at her, she was giving me a puzzled look. That's not like you. Is something wrong? Are you feeling unwell? Do you need to take the day off? No, I'm fine. Sorry about that. Could you please repeat what you just said? I was asking about the progress on the report due tomorrow. Are you sure you're okay? You look more tired than usual. I took a deep breath and rubbed my eyes. I'm really fine. As for the report, I was just about to show it to you. Here it is. Please review it. Impressive. You're always quick with your work. But you do look down. Could it be that you're excited about next week's trip? Next week, we have a company trip. Could it be that you're unexpectedly looking forward to it? Emily nudged my shoulder playfully with her elbow. Don't lump me in with you. Isn't it you who's excited? Ha, you got me. Last year wasn't very enjoyable, so I want to make the most of it this year. How can you be so excited about a company trip? Of course. It's a great chance to bond with colleagues. Plus, she looked intently at my face. When I met her gaze, she quickly turned away. You might end up with your first girlfriend, Alex. I was bewildered by the sudden remark. That's none of your business. Anyway, please check the report. With that, she took the report and walked away, waving it slightly. I had told her before that I wasn't interested in office romances, so she should know. When I mentioned that I had never had a girlfriend, she was so surprised she froze. According to her, people who don't experience romance during their school years struggle as adults. She patted my head sympathetically after saying that. In the end, she even said, "Good luck." I was annoyed and made a sarcastic remark, but she just laughed. It's true I've never been in a romantic relationship. But during my school years, I did have crushes. I attended a private school, spending my days studying. My parents were strict, and even on weekends, I couldn't hang out with friends, or watch TV or read comics. A tutor would come to our house, and I would spend the entire day studying. It felt a bit restrictive, but I worked hard to see the joy on my parents' faces when I got good grades. Perhaps because I had worked so hard or because my parents were worried about me, who showed no interest in anything but studying. They told me I could go to any college I wanted and pursue my own interests. Seizing this opportunity, I decided to interact with various people and enrolled in a college I wanted to attend, even though its academic reputation was a bit lower. However, what awaited me there was the inevitable challenge of communication. Having devoted my entire life to studying through elementary, middle, and high school, I found it difficult to converse with others. Since I hadn't enjoyed any typical childhood pastimes, I couldn't relate to the topics my peers discussed. And I couldn't tell interesting stories either. Eventually, I began to feel isolated on campus. But there was one woman who didn't abandon me. She was a somewhat rebellious girl from the same department. Her personality was open and friendly to everyone, and I was no exception. Even though I couldn't speak well, she would laugh at my attempts and talk to me about various things. Having someone treat me this way was a first time for me, and I gradually found myself attracted to her. This was my first love. We were in the same school activity, which gave us more opportunities to talk. Feeling increasingly drawn to her, I confessed my feelings impulsively. But it was so sudden that she looked a bit troubled and said, "I need some time to think about it." I wondered if I had messed up, but I held on to some hope since she didn't outright reject me. However, as I anxiously waited for her response, I overheard her talking with her friends about me. "Hey, you know Alex from our department?" "Oh yeah, that guy?" "Yeah, he totally has a crush on you, right? Actually, he confessed to me." "No way. You should date him." "Haha, no way. He's such a nerd." I never realized she thought of me that way behind my back. I was mortified and deeply shocked that I had been so naive. I ran away from the scene. It was still morning, and I had afternoon classes, but I couldn't bring myself to attend them. I went back to my apartment and didn't leave for several days. Thus, my first love ended in the worst possible way, unknown to anyone else. Since then, I've struggled to talk to women and ended up as an adult with no romantic relationships.